morning, Lauren. Good morning, everyone. How are you feeling? Good, good. Chemical safety is a great buzz for the beginning of the day, isn't it? Give you a good kick. So I suppose I'm going to give a talk about chemical safety over the next, I suppose, until quarter to 11. And as part of what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to break into three parts. It seems like a lot of there, but it's kind of detailed outline of the of what I'm going to talk about chemical safety. I suppose what I'm talking about, what I hope to do is I've been working in chemical safety for the last 15 odd years since I worked with a company called ITW. I was a European Health and Safety Manager, manufactured a lot of adhesives, coatings and paints. We shipped them all over the world, we worked a lot of solvents, until I joined DCM some compliance. Worked a lot with private companies and actually worked a lot currently with hospitals and healthcare at the moment. I suppose just generally speaking, chemical safety, I find, I'm going to talk about a lot of things I find within companies and within industry, but I suppose one thing I find when it comes to chemical safety in organizations very often is the last thing to be dealt with. And there's sometimes a fear of dealing with the whole aspect of chemical safety. So even from EHS professionals, sometimes, I went down to the lab, God, they're highly qualified staff. And they know all about chemical safety. What am I kind of going in there? And sometimes it's kind of the last thing to be dealt with. So I'm going to talk about a lot about the experiences we see in companies, see in hospitals, give some examples. We're a fairly small group here, so if you have any questions, fire away. I'd say there's no such thing as a stupid question, and I love questions. It's great to get interaction from the crowd. And even if you think you disagree with something I say, here, listen, just pop in and let's discuss it. Input would be great, and as well that you get the most out of the talk. So we're going to start talking about chemical safety. We're going to talk about a basic introduction. A lot of you would probably know this stuff already, but I'm going to cover it. As I say, when you're giving a presentation, tell people something they know, and then tell something that they knew. Some of you might even know more than what is covered in this section. So we talk about just the introduction to chemicals in the workplace, legislation, routes of exposure, how chemicals can enter the body, some examples that we've come across of chemical incidents. We talk about the new GHS classification, and there's still a lot of companies that are not up to speed with the new GHS labelling system and their requirements. I audited a facility there at the end of 2017. They have 5 facilities in Ireland, and they weren't even aware that the regulations have changed from CPL to CLP when it comes to GHS classification. Talk about labelling chemicals, talk about pregnancy, talk about CMRs. Anybody know what CMRs are? Exactly, yeah. So CMRs, carcinogens, mutagens, and toxic for reproduction. And again, a lot of people think, we don't have any CMRs in our company. It's going to be over the top here, these are now specialized companies. But for example, most hospitals, probably the chemicals that they would use, they would have between 50 and 80 CMR chemicals. And it's only when you go in and look at the individual chemicals that you see, oh my God, we have got some CMRs. And then we're going to talk about OELVs. Anybody know what OELVs are? Occupational exposure limits. Okay, so they're the maximum levels that staff should be exposed to. I'm going to focus on the second part then and talk about 10 steps. And I'm going to talk about the practical side of chemical safety. Talk about from procurement right through to disposal of chemicals and emergency response. And last part then, we're going to do a small case study on completing a chemical risk assessment. And this is certainly where I see in companies that, I see from my point of view that chemical risk assessments are not completed correctly and in compliance with the regulations. And I suppose what I very often see is that very often it's just an information sheet. It's just a summary of the safety data sheet. And secondly, very often they're just not honest. They don't say as it is and how the chemicals are used. So to get rolling, so we're going to start off. Oh, it's going to be I'd say trouble. Can you look at David? this
It's your laptop.
further down there, thanks very much.
What's that one there?
So this is obviously into the mic. So we have our introduction and we talk about chemicals. So start off with chemicals in the workplace. Sometimes when we went to companies doing some general health and safety, we ask them, so what chemicals do you have? And they say, well, we don't have any chemicals. And they associate chemicals with, oh, you must have a laboratory. You must have hydrochloric acid and sodium hydroxide. But and then I ask them, well, do you have cleaning products? Do you have a maintenance department? Do you have petrol to cut the lawn out the front? So very often companies aren't aware that they actually have chemicals. And I suppose one thing as well is that very often we've heard where they have what they call hidden chemicals. So they have, an example might be petrol that they use in the lawnmower, or they get in this new piece of equipment in their sterile services department, but tagging along behind it is a cleaning chemical that comes with the machine, and it hasn't been taken into account. So they may have to have specific PPE associated with it. They may have to have special storage requirements. They may need to have specialized training. They may need to use fit testing respirators that they haven't taken into account when they purchased the piece of equipment. So and I suppose some chemicals are dangerous. They can be dangerous to the health, they can be dangerous to the property or the equipment, and they can also be dangerous if they're released into the environment. So, we're going to start off with the legislation. There's numerous pieces of legislation that you could cover when it comes to chemical safety. Even the Safe Health and Welfare Work Act, the employer must provide a safe place of work, which would include the safe use of chemicals. The main piece of legislation is the Safety, Health and Welfare at Work Chemical Agent Regulations. It's the SI 619 of 2001 regulations. I'm not big into legislation, but I actually think it's a good piece of legislation. It's simple, straightforward, and it's lasted since 2001. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. The General Application Regulations deals with specific parts of health and safety, working at high speed use, but also includes, let's say, working with carcinogens or pregnant employees. And chemicals can be carcinogens and can also have pregnancy hazards. The new CLP regulations, whereby we move over to the new GHS system for the labelling of chemicals. Anybody not aware of GHS regulations?
Wouldn't be awfully familiar with them now.
Wouldn't be awfully familiar. Okay, yeah, we go through them. And the last piece of legislation then is to do with the whole REACH. I would say that EPA, who's the body who basically are administering the REACH regulations, what they're doing is they're bringing all manufacturers of chemicals together to share their information associated with the safe use of chemicals and to generate information that's available to the public. But it also, for example, requires that when you supply a chemical product to market, that you provide a safety data sheet. So, just to focus on just the specific chemical agent regulations, the SI 619 of 2001. And I've just picked out a few sections, they're the main sections. And again, it's kind of a bit of a flow in the sense that Regulation 4.1 says you must basically make a list of the chemicals or hazardous chemicals that are used in your workplace. You must complete then 4.3 documented chemical risk assessments for those products. You must take reasonably practical measures to eliminate the handling of hazardous chemicals. And the key thing there is reasonable, practical. Okay, so that's a key thing when it comes to the chemical agent regulations when you're implementing controls. If you are using a small amount of a chemical and there's a better technology that costs 45,000 euros or so, just not maybe reasonable practical for that small amount. Take an example, staining machines that are used in laboratories. If you're using a small amount of stains that are chemicals, you may not need to get into the staining machine, which would cost a significant amount of money. There are employees' duties, for example, that if you're provided with PPE or other control measures, you must use them or wear them. Emergency response, you must have emergency response, such as spill kit, your eye wash station, first aid. And 9 then is training consultation. So you must provide training for your staff, provide information on the use of it. And the training really should be both general awareness, but also function specific relating to the work that they are completing. And then 10 means you must provide health surveillance. That can vary, health surveillance. So for example, when I worked in ITW, on a regular basis we worked with isocyanates. So on a regular basis we had to have urine and blood tests to monitor the exposure to the isocyanates. But even as members of staff who are working with chemicals, you need to monitor your own health. And if there's an issue with you, let's say you're finding a bit tightness in your throat from using the chemicals, or you're beginning to scratch or itch, you need to report that to your supervisor. So there, I want to just go through that briefly, just outlining just the requirements, that these things are requirements according to the regulations. They're not good practice, they are specific requirements. So looking at chemicals then, hazardous chemicals, they can affect your health and they can enter your body. And when it comes to the routes of exposure to chemicals, there are 4 main routes. So anybody know the 4 routes? That's the first one? Ingestion. Inhalation. Absorption. Injection, yeah. Okay, so there's different, some people vary, so some would say eye and skin are separate. So just even to those routes, so I would say eyes, inhalation, injection, and skin. Skin could be absorption or injection. So these are the 4 routes of exposure, the 4 ways in which chemicals can enter your body. So what are you looking to do when you use chemicals? You're looking to create a barrier between the chemicals and those routes of exposure. So first of all, look at inhalation. So inhalation, you inhale a chemical through your nose and through your mouth. It enters your lungs, from there it enters your bloodstream. Different chemicals will target different parts of the body. So for example, the topic at the moment is flour and bakeries. Flour will target your lungs. Mercury will target your central nervous system. Anybody ever hear of Mad as a Hatter or as Mad as a Lighthouse Keeper? Anybody here? So in the 1800s, when people were making hats, they used to use mercury to cure the material. And because they were exposed to mercury, it was affecting their central nervous system, and that's where you got as Mad as a Hatter. Or as Mad as a Lighthouse Keeper. You know, people thought, well, lighthouse keepers, they were they were isolated, they were working on their own. And that's why they went a bit mad. But studies have shown in Canada that that previously, the lights, they rotate on a huge vat of mercury. The lighthouse keepers spent a lot of their time up at the top of the lighthouse, and as a result, they were exposed to significant concentrations of mercury. So, inhalation, skin contact. So again, there's an obvious one, whereby corrosive chemical comes in contact with your skin, burns your skin, you know it's burning your skin, and you take immediate corrective action. But also, working with chemicals over a period of time, whether you're working with solvents or working with cleaning products, over a period of time, permeate the skin and can result in skin sensitization, which is a very common thing in the workplace. Injection is also a possible route of exposure. So, for example, if you work in hospitals, they're with needle injuries. Eye contact. Again, you get a splash of chemical into your eye. It causes burns. But the easiest way for a chemical to enter your body is through the eyes. So did you ever hear of, I think it's called eye rolling? So it's a latest thing that people do with vodka. So you put a bottle of vodka up to your eye, and the vodka will enter through the mucous membrane and enter the small blood vessels at the back of your eye. It's a very quick way to get drunk. Now you want to be drunk to do it. I don't recommend that you do it at home. So the eyes are very, very important, obviously. You know what I mean? And I see it very often. People using cleaning products, they're highly corrosive. They're not using their goggles. Okay, ingestion, again, where somebody may take an overdose of a chemical, but also you have to ask yourself, do people in your organization, do they always wash their hands when they go for a cigarette? Do they always wash their hands when they go for a smoke? You know what I mean? And it's that small or tiny exposure over significant periods of time that basically you can develop chronic health effects associated with the safe use of chemicals. So very often you just say, yeah, I'm not going to chemical, but it's those small quantities. Also, when you inhale a chemical, you also ingest it. Yeah?
Just a very quick question, if you don't mind. Fiona Green and Sea Change. You know the Persil and the detergents
Yes.
that you would have at home. Now,
Yes.
I think they're outside the remit of the legislation as such, but they definitely will be something that will poison someone if they swallow them.
Yes.
So they don't come in under the legislation here, as far as I know, or what arrangements are there in relation
So
to that?
where we're talking about is chemical safety in the workplace.
Yeah.
But when it comes to supplying products to the market, so for example, this is just, I actually popped out of my cards my puncture repair unit, and you can see that there will be labels
Yes.
on it to provide warnings to people that are using the product. So there is the CLP regulations you have to comply with for supplying to the market,
Okay.
but it's not workplace.
Okay.
Unless you're using those products in the workplace.
Right.
And if you use them in the workplace, then you must comply with this legislation.
Right. Thank you.
So when it comes to chemicals then, there are different effects. They can maybe cause a fire, or they can cause health effects to people. And incidents do happen. Significant amount of incidents can happen. And I suppose one of the things I certainly fear is an eye splash. Have you ever got shampoo in your eye? You know what I mean? You're watching here, you got a bit of shampoo in your eye, and a bit of a burn feeling. Think about shampoo is designed, you know what I mean, not to have an effect on your eyes. So imagine if you have a corrosive chemical or a splash from even an irritant chemical splashed into your eye. What do you do if you get a splash into your eye? Rinse it immediately. Okay, with plenty of water. And I suppose you could yes, that's the first thing you do. But a couple of things to be mindful of. If somebody's helping you, they may need to wear gloves before they help you because it could be a corrosive chemical. Secondly, if you're rinsing your eye, if you remember it, if you get a splash into this eye, you should really turn your eye this way. Whereby if you turn it this way, you're going to pour the liquid into the other eye and have double contamination. So very important would be, and how long would you rinse your eye for? 15 minutes, yes. Yeah, at least 15 minutes. Okay, so these are just a couple of examples of burns and incidents that can happen as a result of the handling of chemicals. And incidents do happen. Recently, I was not involved in this, but I was in this report whereby there was a lady in a company, she was cleaning, she had a low top on. And you know the dispensers for the cleaning products, whereby they dispense a small amount into a container and then you fill it up with water. The product splashed off the container up onto her chest. She didn't think anything about it, didn't say it to anyone, went home to bed, got up the following morning and she had burns on her chest as a result of the chemical. And another person was transporting chemicals from a store, and these are recent enough, to the cleaning department. The product was for cleaning ovens, and it spilled, it was leaked onto his runners, and they were taught anything of it. At the end of the day, he had burns on his feet from the chemical. Okay, so what we're moving on to now is to talk about the global harmony system for chemicals, the GHS system. So up until 2010, throughout the world, we had differing label system for chemicals. The difference, so if you're in China, could say toxic, in Europe could say harmful, and in the US it could say irritant. So the UN came together to develop a global system for the labeling of chemicals. So you're probably all familiar with the orange squares from European regulations around since 1972. Okay? So the final deadline passed for implementation of the GHS happened on the 1st of June 2017. So if you have a supplier that's still supplying you with chemicals that has the orange symbols, well then they are no longer in compliance with regulations, and you should not be taking those chemicals from the supplier because the deadline is well gone. So just some terminology associated with the GHS classification. Actually not that important, just to know that it has changed and to make yourself aware of it. One of the big things is that previously these used to be orange square symbols, now they're called integrams. Risk phrases are called hazard statements, safety phrases are called precaution statements. And these are the new integrams. As you can see, they're divided into 3 columns. There are health hazards, physical hazards, and environmental hazards. Health hazards have a direct effect on your health. Physical hazards, not a direct effect on your health, but for example, they can cause fire, which can have a secondary effect, and whereby you might get burned from it. And then we have the environment. So, looking at these, anybody know what this one is? Corrosive. What does that mean? What does corrosive mean? Burn, yeah? Burn what? Okay, burn your eyes. And everybody knows that it causes burns. But what does it also do? It also can corrode metal. So if you look at the symbol, it's broken into 2. One is cause corrosion to skin and eyes, and the other is that it can cause corrosive metal. And I see that as a big incident. It's like, if you ever see a corrosive chemical coming in, generally comes in a plastic container or in a glass container. But very often when they're disposing of the chemical waste, sometimes they put it into a metal container. So I was in a company recently doing an audit, went down, they had 3 25-litre drums of a sodium hypochlorite solution, and the bottom was gone out of 2 of them. It had corroded away. So just, I suppose, that symbol means 2 things. This one, toxic, okay? And this one, what do we call this one? Or does anybody know what it means? Anybody think it means inhalation? Yeah, okay. So what do we call it? Health hazard. What else do we call it sometimes?
Harmful to health.
Yeah, but it's also called the exploding chest. Okay? Because when you look at something, a lot of people think it's actually when you inhale something that's to do with inhalation, but it actually is the exploding chest, and that is an effect which is generally a carcinogen, a mutagen, toxic for reproduction, or organ toxicity. And the an organ toxicity, and it generally is, so yeah, so what is the difference between this symbol and this symbol?
It's kind of like it's more significant. In terms of
Is cancer more? You know, if this is a cancer carcinogen. So if I was to see, this is one symbol on a container, this is a symbol on a container.
It may not affect you immediately, but your germs on your genetic, etc.
Yeah. So this here is acute toxicity, and this is long-term health effects. So if you're working with a chemical, you will develop cancer over a period of time, it could be a period of weeks or a period of years. But with this here, if it's toxic by inhalation, you walk into a room, if it's a high enough exposure to the chemical, you could go unconscious and die as a result of it. Okay? And what's this one called? Okay. Anybody else? It's the exclamation mark. Okay. So it, and that's what it's called. The symbol is called the exclamation mark. Sometimes the irritant is not really, so it says irritant, but irritant is really a short of it. It's basically a lower hazard of any of these 3. So this could be toxic by inhalation, this could be harmful by inhalation, this could be corrosive, this could be irritant, this could be causes cancer, and this could be suspected of causing cancer. So generally the exclamation mark is a lower form of these hazards. But very often, you're right, it is irritant, is what it very often is. Cause irritation to the skin or irritation to the eyes. What is this one? Oxidizing. And this is very often we see people get mix these up. You know, they do look quite similar. And I see on storage locations where they're storing flammable liquids, they have the oxidizing symbol where they should be stored, which is really dangerous in the sense that these are not compatible. Under no circumstances should you store flammable and oxidizing chemicals together. They should be segregated at all times. So this is oxidizing. The chemical is continuously decomposing to generate oxygen. And what, one thing about that, very often these products have vented caps. Okay, so it's a chemical that's decomposing to generate oxygen. Very often it'll have a vented cap on top. So a cap with 3 tiny holes in it. And very important that it's stored upright, first of all. If it's stored inside, it will, the oxygen will build up on the side of the container, it will rupture, and you result in a significant spill. We'll talk about that later on. What's this one? Very obvious. Explosive, yeah. Any explosive chemicals you're aware of?
Picric acid.
Very good, excellent. So if I told you in the last 7 years that bomb squads have been called to hospitals on 5 occasions that I'm aware of. So picric acid is a chemical that's generally stored in water, so it has to be hydrated. What happens is that sometimes people forget to hydrate picric acid. It dries out. When it dries out, it forms explosive crystals, and if you open the container, then could explode. So as a result, if it dries out, then the bomb's going to have to be called to carry a controlled explosion on picric acid. And this one here, pressurized. Okay, very good. And then we have our dead fission tree, our chemicals that are dangerous to the environment. We're going to talk about these briefly in more detail. Have you any questions about those? No? Okay. So when you look at the hazards of chemicals for health, physical, and environment, the three of them combine to form the hazards of your chemicals. So chemicals can be both health hazards, physical hazards, and environmental hazards. Okay, so this is the old symbol. This is one that's been around since 1972 in Europe. We moved over to the GHS symbol, or pictograph. Okay. So all hazardous chemicals that come into the workplace, they have to be labelled. And they have to be labelled with a certain amount of information. And we're going to go straight into looking at this information. So if you look at it, each symbol has to have a pictogram if it's hazardous. So what do we know this one is? Corrosive. And this is our environment. So this then, for each pictogram, there is at least one corresponding hazard statement. Sometimes there's more than one, but if we look here, for example, this first hazard statement causes severe skin burns and eye damage. So if you see a corrosive symbol, you will know that there's a corresponding hazard statement which gives you more detail about the hazard. So this is causes severe skin burns and eye damage, and the dead fish in the tree is very toxic to the aquatic environment. And I suppose then you have your precautionary statements. So it gives you briefly what you need to do in the event of an accident or what PPE to wear when using that chemical. So let's go back, or let's pretend this is a product that you have, and just let's go back and look at this chemical. It causes severe skin burns and eye damage. What are the routes of exposure for this chemical? Skin and eyes, exactly. Okay, so if I was to say to you, what do we want to create a barrier? What routes do we want to prevent from the chemical from entering our body? We want to create a barrier between our skin and our eyes and this chemical. So what PPE would you automatically wear? Gloves and goggles. Now, let's say I was spraying this into an oven. What would there be an extra route of exposure? Inhalation. Yeah. And what PPE might you wear for that? Dust mask. Yeah. Okay. And possibly a face shield. So even from a simple looking at the label, very often you can even determine what are the routes of exposure. How can I create a barrier between that chemical and those routes of exposure, and hence what PPE should I wear? Any questions on that? So we've talked a lot about the chemical types, so I'm going to go through those quite quickly. So just flammable then. So we have, when it comes to flammable liquids, what actually goes on fire? The vapors. It's very important. It's down the hospital, southwest. There was a lady who was a nurse from another hospital who came to visit her mother in this hospital, and she was going out for a cigarette. She washed her hands in alcohol gel, went out, had a cigarette, and her hands just flashed. You know what I mean? There wasn't any injury, but it was because the vapor from the hand gel went on fire, and not the actual liquid. Okay. So again, there's plenty of precautions there to keep away from heat, keep away from sources of ignition, no fires, and store in flammable chemicals. And we talk about these in more detail when we look at the 10 steps to chemical safety. So another thing to note, which I think is very important when people miss out on, is the flash point of the chemical. So flammable liquids will have a flash point. Does anybody know what a flash point is? What's a flash point? Sorry?
Temperature, what it amount.
Yes, yeah. So if I've got a chemical, its room temperature maybe is 21 degrees, and I've got a chemical and it's got a flash point of 17 degrees. So if I have an open here in a drum, and in theory, if I set a spark to those vapors, it will ignite. However, if I reduce down the temperature in this room below 17 degrees, and in theory should not produce vapors, so if I set a spark to it, it should not ignite. So the chemicals that are most dangerous are any chemicals that have a flash point below room temperature, because they would flash or they would ignite at low room temperature. Whereby chemicals that have a flash point above room temperature between 21 and 55, they're only considered as flammable liquids, and in theory they would not ignite, or the vapors would not ignite unless the temperature in the room is increased or the temperature of the liquid is increased. Okay. So it's very important. Does anybody know where you would find the flash point of a product? What section?
Physical properties.
Sorry?
Physical properties.
Yeah, section 9 of the safety data sheet. Very good. Yeah. So oxidizing, then we discussed about oxidizing. They're continuously decomposing to generate oxygen. And the key thing there is store them up to right and store away from other chemicals, in particular flammable liquids. Corrosive then, okay, they can burn, cause burns to your skin, your eyes, but also can corrode metal. And when it comes to corrosive chemicals, is that you really have to divide into two groups. You know what I mean? You have your acids and your alkalis. And people are aware that a lot of cleaning chemicals, they will either contain either acids or alkalis. So they will contain sodium hydroxide maybe, which is an alkali, or they will contain maybe phosphoric or hydrochloric acid. And it basically, it has a burning effect to clean whatever you want to clean. So the thing is, if you've got alkalis and if you have acids, it's important that they're not stored together. Because if an acid and alkali mix and react, then you could have an adverse reaction. The thing is about pH is, if I have a chemical with a pH of 3 and I have a chemical of a pH of 2, is there much different? They're quite close numbers. What do you think? Is there much difference? Or between 2 and 1, would you say there's much of a difference?
It's logarithmic, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So what does that mean?
It's not linear, so there's a much bigger difference between 2 and 3 than there is between 3 and 4.
Exactly, yeah. So it's tenfold. So if you have a chemical that has a pH of 3 and a chemical that has a pH of 2, it is 10 times more acidic. So that's exactly. So I'm saying if it's between a 2 and a 1, it's another 10 times. So if you have a chemical that has a pH of 1 and another chemical that has a pH of 3, the one that has a pH of 1 is 100 times more acidic than the one that has a pH of 3. So something to take into account again when you're doing the rest of your risk assessments. Okay. We discussed again about chemicals have some have acute and some are chronic health effects. So acute is where you have an immediate effect on you, whereby chronic is generally developed over a period of time, maybe a number of days, weeks, or years. And we mentioned acute toxicity is due to toxic chemical, and chronic toxicity is the exploding chest. And this here, the explanation are to be a lower form of either. Okay, so irritant then is a lower form of those chemicals, those hazards. Okay. Skin sensitization, we kind of discussed that already, whereby you come in contact with a chemical you might be working with for 10, 15 years, has no effect. Over a period of time, it's permeating the skin, and the next thing you have an adverse reaction and you're allergic to the product. Okay. Toxic chemicals, so we mentioned about them having acute effects, and you can keep the quantities to minimum. Keep down the quantities that you're exposed to, try and have controlled environments whereby they're isolated from the person that is using them. Okay, and the environment should not be released into the environment. And this is when you're doing your risk assessment and you can dispose of chemicals. You can ask them, what chemicals can I put down the drain? What chemicals do I need to send for a specialized disposal company? So you need to take this into account when you're looking at that. So looking at carcinogens, mutagens, and toxic reduction are also known as CMRs. So carcinogens is something that is potentially cause cancer. And carcinogens are divided into 3 categories: category 1A, 1B, and 2. 1A is a known carcinogen. Anybody know of a known carcinogen? Asbestos, yeah.
Formalin.
Formalin is a category 1B. Okay, so it's formaldehyde or solution or formalin, that would be a 1B, so for example. Any other common thing that's a category 1A?
Borax.
Sorry?
Borax.
Bovax?
Borax.
I've never heard that
It's in,
now.
makes up soap flakes.
Okay, and that's a category.
It's definitely a known carcinogen because it's on the label, is on their products.
Okay, that's it. So it may be.
It's on the candidate list.
It's on the candidate list, is it? Yeah, okay. So yeah, so there's just an example. So the category 1B then, another category 1A is smoking. It's a category 1A carcinogen. It's known to cause cancer. Outside of chemicals, of course. Category 1B then example is formaldehyde solution. And category 2 then are suspected human carcinogens. And outside of chemicals, again, examples like that would be actually processed meat and mobile phones. Okay, so there'd be a certain or limited evidence to say that they could cause cancer. Mutagens then, so these are substances that can affect your genes. So they would have no effect on you. So you could work with this chemical all your life, have no effect, but it can affect your genetic system, and as a result then it can affect your children or your grandchildren. Again, you'd be surprised the number of chemicals. Fentanyl is an example of a mutation. Again, the criteria there, category 1A, 1B, and 2 apply. So toxic reproduction, so these are substances that will interfere with normal development of reproduction. And again, there's category 1A, 1B, and 2. And the thing about this is that some of these chemicals can affect both fertility of male and female. So it's very important as well. A lot of times people take away the fact that they can affect males as well as females. Okay, and teratogen. So teratogens are substances that can affect the development of the fetus. And have you all heard of thalidomide? So thalidomide was a morning after sickness drug for pregnant women about 50 years ago. It was taken, it was a very good drug for the morning after sickness, but what happened was that babies were born without either legs, arms, or both. And there are chemicals that are in hospitals, for example, or in companies that are classified as teratogens. So, pregnancy. What happens if you become pregnant? If you become pregnant, it's important that the employee would inform the supervisor and that a risk assessment would be complete. As part of that risk assessment, you should review chemicals that are used. Tell me, can somebody who is pregnant work with a chemical that has pregnancy hazards?
Depending on the control measures, I'm sure, but
Exactly. So long as there's adequate control measures, yes, they can continue to work with it, but some of those control measures could mean that they can't work with it. But if you have adequate control measures, yes, they can continue to work with those chemicals. And we mentioned the hazard statements earlier on. This is a list of the hazard statements that are currently considered as pregnancy hazards. So if you look at section 2 of your safety data sheet, and if the product has these hazard statements, this will give you an indication if the product is a pregnancy hazard. So we're nearly at the end of the first section, and I'm just going to talk about occupational exposure limit values. So occupational exposure limit values are the maximum level that staff can be exposed to in the workplace. So every 2 years, Health and Safety Authority brings out the code of practice with a list of about 700 or 800 chemicals, and they outline the maximum exposure that staff should be exposed over either an 8-hour day or over a 15-minute period. So these are just some examples of occupational exposure limits for 8-hour and 15 minutes. So if we take, for example, xylene. So xylene has an 8-hour OELV of 50 parts per million. What does that mean? It means that if somebody's working with xylene, over 8 hours, on an average, the maximum that they can be exposed to is 50 parts per million. So for every million parts that are in the air, the maximum number on average, that they can be exposed to is 50 parts per million. However, you can work with the xylene for a 15-minute period at exposure limit, an average exposure limit of 100 parts per million. So these are just some examples of 8-hour and 15-minute exposure limits. These are the maximum. They're not targets. Not something that people should look to receive. You need to try and keep it well below these exposure limits when you're working with chemicals, and possibly at least 25% below the OALP. So this is just some examples. So what happens is when you're working with some chemicals, you need to get an industrial hygienist or get monitoring equipment to monitor the staff that are exposed to chemicals like these. So you get somebody in, they attach a badge, somebody who's working with the chemical, they'll monitor over a period of time, they get the average, and then they'll compare it to the OALP. One mistake I sometimes see with monitoring is that you get in somebody for a day to do monitoring. So Jimmy starts working, he's working in, let's say, a lab, and they're monitoring formula. Put on 9 o'clock in the morning, and finish at 5, take off the badge, monitor it, and they notice that Jimmy's working with xylene, and he's only exposed to maybe 2 parts per million or 3 parts per million. But wasn't taken into account is that maybe during the day, Jimmy was involved in key activities. So maybe he was decanting formula for 10 minutes, he was maybe disposing of formula for 10 minutes, and the 15-minute STL was not taken into account. So over the 15 minutes, he may have been exposed to 200 parts per million, but when it's averaged out over an 8-hour day, it's significantly lower. So it's very important that you look at the work activities when you're doing industrial hygiene monitoring. And this is something that is very often forgotten about. It's the short-term exposure limit. Very often I'm asked, how often do we have to do industrial hygiene monitoring? And this is how frequently you need to do it. So if the OALP does not exceed 25%, 64 weeks, if it's between 25 and 50% of the OALP every 32 weeks, and then if it exceeds 50%, it's every
Henry, where's that regulation?
That's the ISO standard.
ISO standard?
Yeah. Okay, so that's actually not, that's a standard. I don't have the name of the standard, but I have an email I can send it on to you. Yeah, if you don't mind, yeah. So that's just an indication of the exposure. Okay, how frequently we should repeat the monitoring. Okay, and finally, I want to finish up in this section with something that I think a lot of people make a mistake of when they look at chemicals, is that they associate the smell of a chemical with how dangerous it is. So I went to a room, I went to that, oh, this smell, this must not be a healthy place. So I walk into a lab. So what we're looking at here is the odor threshold versus the occupational exposure limit. Okay? So the odor threshold of xylene is 1.1%. That's basically the average concentration of which the average person will begin to smell xylene. So if I'm walking towards a laboratory that's using xylene and I begin to smell it, the concentration is about 1.1%. Okay. So I walk into that and say, God, what's that smell? I wouldn't like to work here. It's 1.1 parts per million. Okay. The maximum exposure that you should be exposed to is 50 parts per million. So it's just important to notice that very often the smell of the chemical is not related to how dangerous it is. Now, you can have chemicals that have a nuisance odor. It's just not nice working there. It's really sweet. We need to look at it, but it's not related to how dangerous it is. And as you look at this chemical, for example, butane, once you smell it, you're above the maximum exposure limit. So in a way, these chemicals are kind of good to give you a warning of a good warning of when it's basically of exposure. But if you start smelling butane, you're well above the maximum exposure limit. And same with acetonitrile, you're well above it. And the ultimate one is carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide, if you walk into a room that's high concentrations of carbon monoxide, and it's odorless, so the odor threshold is 100,000 parts per million, and the ART is 20 parts per million. Okay. So just as important to notice that if you don't get a smell of a chemical, especially toxic chemicals, they can still have health effects on you. But equally, if you have chemicals that smell, does not mean that it is necessarily very hazardous. Okay. So, this is the end of, I think it's the end of section, yeah. Finally, just actually finish off just with solvents. Any of you ever use white spirits to clean brushes? Yeah. Any of you ever used to wash your hands? I've done. Yeah, it's great stuff. Clean the paint. Would you use it now? Okay. Or have you ever used white spirits to get a bit fizzy? It's a bit, whoa, if you're in a small area, in a combined area. Okay, so solvents generally highly flammable, and they cause you basically dizziness, and basically if you're overexposed, you can go unconscious as a result of that. Okay. Okay, we're moving on to part B. How much time are we? We're well over time, are we?
It's 5 to 10 now.
5 to 10, okay. Before we move on to the second part, have you any questions? Is there anything you'd like me to cover that you feel like we're not covering at the moment? Like we're moving on to this section here, is there anything that you'd like to cover in more detail? No? Okay. So we'll move on then to part B, and we might take a break after this maybe. Yeah, I think so, before we go on to the desktop, the risk assessment. So what I'm looking at here is 10 practical examples of chemical safety, or 10 steps for chemical safety. So when I look at chemical safety, what I see is the most important step in chemical safety is procurement. Okay? And it's very often overlooked. Very often on sites, chemicals are brought in, and then they say, how will we deal with them? So the thing is, when you look at procurement, what kind of things do normally people who are in procurement think of? They think of the cost. You know what I mean? Think we would get maybe value in bulk. So when you look at buying chemicals, it's very important that before you bring a chemical on site, that you complete a risk assessment. Like I see in labs in particular, special offer, 5 litres of silver nitrate, and when they only need like 2 mils, so they have it there for maybe 25 years, they have this container. So if you can buy small containers. When it comes to dealing with spills, are you better off to have 1 10-litre container or 10 1-litre containers? Sorry? The 1-litre ones, exactly, because the likelihood of the 10 of them spilling is low, but if you've only 1 container, and if it spills, then you have a significant spill on your hands. So you buy a cheap chemical, it's highly corrosive and may harmful by inhalation, versus a chemical that's non-hazardous. So you have to do your risk assessments, you have to look at the storage, the handling, the PPE, the movement of it throughout the organisation, and it's significantly different if you have a non-hazardous chemical. And even if you're the person doing risk assessments, it's so much easier if they're less hazardous or non-hazardous. So I would see that as the most important part of chemical safety is your initial procurement, and to have an approval process around procuring those chemicals. Second one is the hierarchy of controls, which I think are very important, which are kind of, they're very often overlooked in a certain extent. But when we look at chemicals, and you have chemicals in the workplace, to look at elimination, substitution, isolation, inclusion, work procedures, engineering controls, and PPE. And if we look at those elimination, example of elimination is fixer and developer that's used in the photograph industry. The chemicals are carcinogens, okay? But what have they done? They've moved over to digital systems. So you no longer have fixer and developer. They've eliminated the use of the chemical. Substitute for safer alternatives, particularly with cleaner chemicals. There's so many companies now providing chemicals that are not corrosive, non-hazardous. You can certainly look to substitute them for safer alternatives. Isolation and enclosure. So for example, in chemo prep rooms in hospitals, they have isolation areas where they prep the chemicals where staff do not come in contact with them. Working procedures is possibly one that's overlooked. I mentioned my instrumentation earlier on. If you had some work procedures, some training of staff, and awareness, it can make a big difference. The next one is engineering controls, local exhaust, and general ventilation. And one of the biggest things I see when it comes to ventilation, or even design of ventilation, is that very often it's only engineers who install the ventilation system. Okay, so engineers are great at installing ventilation systems and even designing them, but do they take into account the chemical that's been used? So, for example, is the chemical that the person, the user has, is it heavier or lighter than air? Okay, so the engineer doesn't take that into account and say, okay, so let's put in a fume hood there, we've got a bench here, let's put in a fume hood there. But what if the chemical is denser than air? So that the vapors are dropping to the ground. So what are you doing? You're actually pulling vapors up past the person to the ventilation system. So whenever you're installing or looking at ventilation, it's very important to have expertise of, let's say, an industrial hygienist or somebody who's competent to look at the chemicals, to take them into account as in conjunction with the engineers. And finally then, we have our PP, and PP we talked about at the later slide. Okay, so these are just some typical control measures. So moving on to safety data sheets. So in safety data sheets, I've got an example of one. If you take out your handouts there, there's an example of a acetic acid safety data sheet. So it's in the actual ChemDoc pack, yeah? So you have there. Can I get one of those there, Lauren? Yeah. So, as I mentioned with regulations, it's a legal requirement that anybody who supplies a chemical to the market must supply a safety data sheet. And secondly, the company who, the organisation that the person is working for, they must also make sure the safety data sheets are provided to staff.
Sorry, Henry, good question. Do you have to provide, does the supplier have to provide a safety data sheet for every single chemical if it's not hazardous?
No, they don't.
I just
No,
wondered
yeah.
sometimes.
So, and there's other exemptions too, for example, like medicines. So, medicines are exempt from it, food products are exempt from the requirements. But I would say is that most companies are now supplying safety data sheets whether the chemical is hazardous or non-hazardous. Does that answer your question?
So if it's hazardous, basically you have to have, definitely have one.
Sorry?
So if the chemical is hazardous, you have to have the.
Oh yes, if it's hazardous, you definitely have to have a safety data sheet. Again, there is example is the, for example, cytotoxic drugs are hazardous drugs. They generally are CMRs themselves, carcinogens, mutagens, and toxic reduction. But by law, you actually don't need to have the safety data sheet. But a lot of companies now are supplying safety data sheets. Okay. So when it comes to safety data sheets, I see that it's kind of a tick box exercise very often in companies. So here's some questions: do we have safety data sheets? Do we have them in the folder? Do staff know where they are? And that's kind of it. Whereby very often staff are not briefed on the safety data sheet or made aware of it. Very often they're not updated. And one thing I would see is that very often the responsibility is placed on people in the department to source the safety data sheets. And what happens is very often is that they go online, so this is acetic acid, they get it from Sigma Aldrich, for example, they type in acetic acid safety data sheet, search, take the first one off the search, print it off, put it into their folder. Very often what happens, and very often it's a US safety data sheet. So, is everybody familiar with safety data sheets? What section is first aid? Everyone? 4. Very good. Okay. So, looking down through the safety data sheet, we're just going to cover a few quick sections. Section 2 is very important. It's the hazards of the chemical. And section 2.2 is the label elements. So it shows the hazards of chemicals, and the information that's in section 2.2 must also be the information that's on the label of the product. So if this was a safety data sheet for this, then the information on here would exactly be the same as the information in section 2.2 of the safety data sheet. Section 4 is first aid, which is, yeah, right. Section 3 is a key thing that sometimes, section 3 contains the ingredients of the chemical. Very often people confuse section 2 and section 3. They take the information on section 3, but it's actually the ingredients. And very often the ingredients are more hazardous than the finished product. So take, for example, this here is acetic acid, it's 100%. What is 4% acetic acid? Vinegar. Very good. Okay. So if you had a safety data sheet for vinegar, in section 2 and section 3, it would show acetic acid with all the hazards associated with acetic acid, and it would say 4%. You know what I mean? So the hazards in section 3 do not correspond really to section 2 unless it's a 100%. Section 4 is first aid, section 5 is firefighting, section 6 is accidental release measures. So this is a section that we would look at in the event of a spill or a dangerous incident. Section 7 tells you how you should handle and store information. Section 8 is where we will find our occupational exposure identifiers. So if you look at the regulations, but if you look here, if you look at the top of page 4, it will show you the Irish occupational exposure limits, 15 and 10 for the 8 hour and the 15 minutes. Section 8.2 will tell you about your PPE, which is very important to take into account. And that's one thing safety statutes have improved on, is the detail about the PPE required to be worn, the type of material, breakthrough time, information like that is quite important. Section 9 can be very useful information. And in the case I find very important, which mentioned earlier, was the flash point. So the flash point of the chemical. So the flash point of acetic acid is 40 degrees. So it's not a highly flammable substance, it's just a flammable substance. So if you're storing this, you'll say, well, here, listen, the temperature in the room needs to increase before we temperature in the room needs to increase basically before it would create flammable vapors. So section 10 then deals with the stability and reactivity. So what chemicals can and can't store the product with. Section 11 deals with toxicological information, which is, if you're unsure about the information, maybe in section 2, look for greater detail in section 11 of the STS. Okay. I would see those as the most important sections. Section 12 is to do with the environment and ecology. Section 13 is to do with disposal. 14 is to do with transport. Unless you're transporting the dangerous goods, you're not required to, by road. It's only if you transport dangerous goods by public road do you need to look at section 14. 15 is regulatory information, and section 16 is other information. Now, one mistake that people make about section 16 again is that section 16 is the hazard statements from section 3 of the safety statute. So it's the hazard statements associated with the raw materials. And some people say, when it says in section 16 it says this, but it's added information about the raw material and not the actual product you have. So going back to my 4% acetic acid, which is vinegar. Any questions about safety data sheets?
Just about the spontaneous combustion.
Yeah.
Is that flash point? That's the same thing?
No.
Is it?
Spontaneous combustion is whereby if it reaches its temperature, so let's say the spontaneous combustion is 100 degrees. If the temperature of that reaches 100 degrees, it will spontaneously combust. In other words, it doesn't need an ignition source.
Okay.
The chemical itself would just combust spontaneously.
And is that considered on the data sheet in section 9? Should it be, or?
I would say, and I wouldn't be an expert on this, but I would say that sometimes they wouldn't have the information associated with the product.
It's probably under explosives. Is it explosive properties here? Auto ignition.
Auto ignition,
Yeah, okay.
So there it is, yeah.
Well, I just was confused about flash points there for a second. Okay,
On data sheets, I think you alluded to it earlier, that sometimes they're not as accurate as you'd like them to be, and oftentimes we as professionals will query the manufacturer or supplier and get a response saying that these are accurate as per the legislative requirement. Does that satisfy a court rule to say we've queried it, we may not believe the factual information on it, but
And maybe what sections might you be talking about?
but any number of sections, I suppose I queried an oven cleaner previously saying it was highly corrosive to the esophagus. Is this a chemical that should be in public use?
Yeah.
Demonstrate users.
I would say that certainly there are safety statutes out there that are poor quality, that aren't from reputable companies. They don't have the competence to create safety statutes, and certainly you should question them. But what the other thing I would take into account is that the safety statute sheet is generated for whether you're using 5 mils or 5,000 litres of it. I mean, so it is quite a generic document. So certainly you should question it. If you're unsure of a classification on substances like that, I would look at ECHA. So go on to ECHA, it's a very good resource. Type in the CAS number, they will give you the harmonised classification or the the classification of the REACH classification for that substance.
How do you spell that, Henry?
So ECHA, E-C-H-E. Anybody use that?
Yeah, so I have used it for the same situation before, as that chap there, and then you go back to the supplier and you say, actually, it's still not, it's still not the data sheet, it's still, you have the information you need,
Mm.
and then you just kind of hit a blank wall, to be honest. But
Yes,
that's,
yeah.
they're just saying, well, look, this is what we're supplying.
And
That's
very often
it.
they just don't have the competence, you know what I mean, they don't have the knowledge themselves to provide.
They just don't want to, I suppose, update their data sheet, or the other issue that you might find is it's quite outdated, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's an old data sheet.
Yeah. So I think Dermot's going to talk about that.
I just say one thing on that, like that's where, because I suppose it's kind of part of what I'm talking about, what I would say on that is, essentially, if you are not happy with the safe data sheet, you have to make that call to your own staff, do you want that product here? So like, if it is something that is essential to your business, so that is the only product that will run this machine, you're in a bit of a bind. But if it's a floor cleaner, and you're not happy with the SDS, for a number of reasons, or it's old, well then you just, you
Well, I think floor clear is going to be a little easier, but this is their lab, so the lab manager says, no, I have to use this, or I want to use this, do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's a little bit, it's not quite so straightforward. I'd say.
Yeah, I know,
So it's a bit of a difficult one.
And you kind of are in a bit of a bind, because it is,
Yeah.
if you're not happy with the SDS, yes, the supplier is under an obligation to give you a proper one.
That's right.
But also you're under an obligation to look after your staff.
Yeah.
So you are kind of, we would say the same, like if you
Yeah.
take the worst case, if they have no safe data sheet at all.
But it's
Then-
poor quality safety.
Yeah,
sheet.
but even then, like, if basically, if the HSA were to come in and see the poor quality safe data sheet there, they will pull you up on it. They will say, well, that safe data sheet is 10 years old. You can say, well, I've tried the supplier. The HSA will still say, well, that's okay, the supplier is wrong, but you shouldn't have the product here if you can't get a proper SDS for it. And I know it's not an easy answer, it puts you in a bind, but the HSA will not let you off. They would have in the past, but they will not let you off by just saying, well, I checked with them and that's the best they have.
One of the things I've known that came to top of procurement, it's important to improve the chemical, but very often to improve the supplier as well, to make sure that you're happy the supplier will provide you with safety data sheets to meet those requirements. But I know that's not always helpful, but yeah, there is two obviously there on the post supplier end on the organisation. Okay, so chemical risk assessments. So it's a legal requirement to complete a chemical risk assessment for hazardous chemicals used in the workplace. And I suppose when it comes to chemical risk assessments, we're going to talk about later on, but I see a lot of common mistakes with chemical risk assessments in the sense that very often they're a summary sheet. So they take information out of the safety data sheet and they apply it to their organisation without taking into account the quantities that are used, the frequency of use, the number of people that are exposed to it. Secondly, what I mentioned earlier is very often people don't put in what is in front of them. So, for example, with the lab, they'll say something like safety glasses are available, but are safety glasses being worn? They may copy the first aid or the PPE from Section 8.2 the safety data sheet, but not take into account what PPE they're using. But we're going to talk about it on our case study in more detail about chemical risk assessments. Okay. Storage of chemicals. When it comes to storage of chemicals, some general principles: if you can store chemicals up off the ground, store chemicals below shoulder height, store and if that's an issue whereby you need to store them above shoulder height, store the non-hazardous chemicals up high and the hazardous chemicals down low. Store light chemicals over heavy, and store solids over liquids. So just some general things regarding storage.
Sorry, just one thing, Henry. Can you store the chemicals in the base of the, say, a chemical storage press?
Mm-hmm.
Can you store them in the base, in the bond part?
That's a good question.
I've recommended that they don't do that
Yeah,
if they can avoid it.
I would avoid it. Yes, yeah, definitely. Can you definitely do it? Anybody have any thoughts on it?
Bund's a bund.
Sorry?
Bund's a bund.
Bund is a bund, but I suppose if you put it into the bund, but you still have enough space to contain the chemical, for example, would it be okay? Yeah. But I would say best practice is not to put it into the bund space.
It's just you're running into other hazards
If
then,
it's,
like
if
manual
it's a
handling and
single-use
everything else.
bund, if you've only one product in it, then grand. But if you've two chemicals and the possible issues of those mixing, then you styrofoam.
It's just, it's back to risk assessment again
Yeah.
in relation to that, so I look at it, but I recommend that they don't use it, but then it's kicking on to manual handling issues as well.
So, again, incompatible chemicals should be kept apart. So, for example, we have acids and bases, they should be not stored together. And we're going to look at that in the next slide. But just some useful tools that I find that there's not great information on the HSE website regarding storage of chemicals. So actually, you look at the UK HSG 51, HSG 71 regarding just, I think, some very good guidance there surrounding the storage of chemicals. And just something I suppose something that's relatively recent is just if you're storing highly flammable liquids in a lab, that it should meet the standard of the EN 14470-1 standard or equivalent standard. So our highly flammable liquids are those with the flash point below room temperature. Okay. So again, when you storage, keep stocks to minimum. Always return the products back to the store after use. Segregation then of chemicals, or general guidance surrounding segregation of chemicals. But again, you need to look at section 7 and section 10 of your safety data sheet. So I have here, just in the handouts, I have this handout here. It's just a general segregation table for the storage of chemicals. So this is a general guidance, but again I have to say you should also look at section 7 and section 10 of the STS for specific storage and segregation requirements for the chemical. So the question is, can flammable liquids be stored with corrosive chemicals? So anybody? Yeah, so they should be kept, for example, flammable and storage chemical, corrosive chemicals should be kept 3 meters apart. So if you look at your flammable liquids down the left hand side, and you look at your corrosives, so class 3 and class 8 corrosive substances are corrosive and flammable liquids.
If it's flammable and corrosive, is there one that takes priority?
I would say that, and I can move to correction, I would say that the physical hazard should take priority. So the flammable liquid, so for example, acetic acid is both flammable and corrosive, and I would say that the flammable would take priority. So again, what I see a lot when it comes to segregation chemicals is that acids and bases are stored in the same cabinet. Sometimes if you have small quantities of a corrosive and or an acid and alkali, you put them in the same store, but you'd have separate bunds. So keep them separated by a bund. So if one spills, it spill it into its own bund. The other thing when it comes to storage is to make sure that the cabinets themselves are compatible with the chemicals. So if you've got corrosive chemicals, put them into a metal cabinet that's not coated, it can corrode the cabinet itself. Or even the ventilation duct. So I've seen cabinets in use, they've got a ventilation duct out the back. They could be used for flammable liquids. You look at the back of the cabinet and you see that it has corroded. So it's actually venting to the actual immediate laboratory or the room. So small things like that can make a difference. Again, when it comes to storage chemicals, it's important to have the hazards of the chemicals on the outside. Sorry.
I want to go back to your acetic. I disagree with you.
Okay, yeah, no, go ahead, yeah.
You were saying the physical being the flammable.
Yes.
But under its UN designation, its sub-risk is flammable. Therefore, corrosive would be its major risk.
Okay.
So therefore, I'd be more concerned about it being a corrosive than a flammable.
Okay, yeah.
So store it under a corrosive. And that's
Yeah.
what we would always do.
Yeah, so you store it as an acid rather than...
Absolutely, because it's only a sub-risk under its UN designation.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point, yeah. Yeah, okay, that's a good input, yeah. So that's probably, I probably would have to, if you're saying it's a primary hazard, then I'd have to, yeah, I agree with you on that. Okay. So the handling of chemicals then, some general precautions. So never to eat, drink and smoke the chemicals. Remember to wash your hands after work. And these are small issues, even with the culture within an organisation. Do staff always wash their hands after using chemicals? Do they always wash their hands when they go for a smoke? Never leave chemicals unattended. What does hydrochloric acid look like in a lab? Here, what's it look like? It looks like water. So if you have it in a lab and let's say somebody comes in to clean the place, they look at this product and they think it could be water. It's very important, for example, to label preparations or label containers. PPE then, very important. When it comes to PPE, very important, it's a legal requirement that staff wear it. It's, when it comes to PPE, look at Section 8 of the Safe Staff Sheet. As I mentioned, the information in Section 8 has improved a lot. It's important never to wear damaged PPE and report it to your supervisor. And one thing to know is that there are limitations to PPE. One common thing I see when I go into catering services departments, for example, is I see them for cleaning the oven, they wear a dust mask. You know what I mean? Dust mask obviously is not suitable for working with chemicals. Or they may wear latex gloves for handling chemicals, which again, very often are incompatible. It's more suitable to use very often nitrile gloves when you're dealing with cleaning products. So very often to be aware of the limitations of the PPE that you're using. Okay, so as I say, there's legal obligations upon staff to wear their provided PPE, to wear it, store it correctly, and report it to their supervisor. One thing about PPE in general is quite cheap. So if you're introducing safety classes or introducing PPEs, to consult the staff. So maybe introducing, say, listen, these are the 3 types of safety classes that we have. Which ones here would you like to wear? Because it is important to wear it. If you don't like wearing it, it's going to be a challenge. So it's good to involve in the wearing of, regarding the wearing of PPE. Okay. Transport of the chemicals, again, it would be important to look at the risk assessment, but look at, in your organisation, who transports chemicals? Is there a certain member of staff that transport? Have they completed chemical safety training? Do you transport chemicals in a lift? You know what I mean? Involved in an incident with a hospital, they were delivering formalin, chemical delivery van up in the public elevator, there was a spill in the elevator. It resulted in some people becoming, acutely sick as a result of the formalin in the elevator. So even small things to look at when you are moving chemicals around. And good thing is to use a secondary container when you're transporting. So if there's a spill, it would be contained within the secondary container. Important to know is that if you decide to transport chemicals by public road to another site, you must meet the requirements of the transport regulations. So very important, it is not covered in course. You need to look at the various sets of transport regulations for that. So chemical safety training is at number 9. So when it comes to training of staff, it's very important. It's a legal requirement staff receive both general awareness training around the chemicals, but also function-specific training. If they're involved in spill control, you should include that in the training also. So when it comes to chemicals, for example, you can have a member of staff who's only using a very small amount of a chemical, not using it on a regular basis, and you say to yourself, okay, so what training do we need to provide that person? Sometimes, so long as you cover topics required, such as the hazards of the chemical, the specific use of the chemical, it can be simple as maybe a toolbox talk, or part of your induction. But then other staff, such as staff working in ecology, they possibly should receive formal training, which involves maybe a 3 or 4 hour course. Okay, finally, moving on to emergency response, just in time for the tea and coffee. The emergency response, I have to ask you, we spoke about if you get an eye spill or an eye splash into your eye, in your organisation. So that's the first step you said, you rinse your eye. What do you do then? Sorry? Okay, so, and I don't mean to think about it, so if you're in your organisation, if you're in a department, what would that medical attention be?
First aid is on site.
Okay, but what you think about in your department, what is the specific thing you do?
Follow the procedure that is written.
Yes, but what is that procedure? So if you're in a department, you say you rinse your eyes, what is the next step you do? So I'm asking you to think of this in your organisation or in your company. So you get a splash in your eye, you're rinsing it there, I'm screaming because my eyes are burning. What is the next thing that happens? I'm rinsing it out, I'm rinsing it for 15 minutes. What is the next thing that will happen in your organisation? So it's the point is exactly, it should be a small procedure. So it's important that people know those steps of those procedures. So do you have a first aider? What if the person is working on their own? What if the person's working out of hours? So let's say call a first aider. What's the next step? We call the ambulance. Or do we have an OC health department? My point is that it's important that everybody knows exactly what you do and what are those 5 steps. Because if they don't know it now, when there's no emergency, will they know it if it's an emergency situation? Will they panic and say, oh, what do we do, what do we do, what do we do? They should know those 5 steps. So maybe it is rinse your eyes for 15 minutes, call the first aider or call OC Health. What is the number of OC Health? Or is it called 999? You know, so that they know those exact steps for dealing with an emergency response. When it comes to dealing with emergency response, obviously prevention is better than cure. And a big thing I see is housekeeping. Housekeeping surrounding chemicals is very important. Declutter your areas, keep chemicals to a minimum. Okay? Spill kits. So when it comes to dealing with a spill then, so we have an example of a spill kit here. Okay, this is a spill kit I would use for cleaning spills. It's nothing fancy, this is actually just an oil spill kit, I believe, yeah. So when it comes to the spill kit, very often people don't know what's inside it. I mean, they've never opened it. You know what I mean? They've never received specific training about how to deal with a spill. The other thing is that the spill kit should be checked on a regular basis. So maybe checked once a month. A couple of tips on that is that if you have a breakable tie at the closure to the spill kit, okay? So just, you know it's been used and you just need to check that it hasn't been interfered with. And if it's got maybe an neutralizing agent or something inside the kit, is you can actually write the expiry date on the outside. So you just check the expiry date, check if it's been used, and you don't have to go through the kit, count all the number of pads, the number of hits in the kit. So let's just say very briefly if we have a spill. Okay, one question before we do this spill. Okay, I have a chemical in these 2 containers. They're exactly the same chemical. Okay, one falls on the ground and spills, and the other is in the cup. Okay, what is the difference in the 2 between what's on the ground and what's in the cup? Contained. Okay, so I put a little barrier or board off the area so that people can't access it. What is the difference now?
Surface area.
Excellent, very good. Okay, it's surface area. So if I have a spill here, spill onto the floor, if I have a fire, the size of the fire is going to be this size. Okay? If I have a fire, if this goes on fire, it's a significantly greater fire. If this is a toxic chemical, my exposure to this toxic chemical is this surface area. The toxic chemical here is now significantly greater. So the whole thing about a spill, the key thing there is the surface area that you are exposed to. So when it comes to dealing with spills, just let's talk through quickly what's the process. So we have a spill in our department. What's the first thing we do?
Contain.
Okay. Do we? Anybody else? I walk into this room. There's a spill here on the ground.
Identify.
Okay. Anything before we do that?
Raise the alarm.
Sorry.
Raise an alarm.
Sorry.
You need to raise an alarm.
Yeah. So we need to secure the area. Okay. So to make sure nobody maybe comes into the area. Nobody comes in. If you safe and if you safe to do so, you can open a window maybe for ventilation. What's the next step?
Try and ascertain what the product is.
Exactly. Maybe we know Mary was working here this morning. Ring Mary and say, Mary, here's now down here in the lab this morning. There seems to be split notice. Just I did a litre there of formula. What's the next thing? What do you do then? Okay, before you do that, PPE. How would you find out what PPE you use?
MSDS.
STS. So we source the safety data sheet for the product. What do we do then? What do we look at? What sections do we look at?
Accidental release.
Exactly, accidental release. And what other section would you need to look at for protecting yourself? Section 8, very good. Look at what PPE you wear. So what is the most important thing in dealing with a spill? Sorry?
Know what you're dealing with.
What is the single most important thing in dealing with a spill?
Protecting the individuals.
Exactly, yeah. Your own health and safety. So it's important that you protect yourself and you're comfortable dealing with a spill. So you don your PPE. You know, for dealing with spill, very often I'll use just the Tyvek suits. You lose your, you'll use maybe, depending on what's gloves it says in your safety data sheet. One thing I'll do is I'll use crossweave tape, so chemical resistant tape. So if I put on my gloves and I've got my Tyvek suit, I put tape around here, because very often the exposure here, you know what I mean, there can be exposure here to the chemical. Wear my respirator if it says accordingly. If it's flammable liquid, I bring my relevant fire extinguisher. And so I have my PPE, I have my spill kit. Inside my spill, I have every time I see these, it reminds me of my granny's house. She used to have one of these to put up against the door to stop the draft coming in. So if we have a spill, we contain the spill first of all. So you contain it, and then so you place around the spill, okay, overlap, and then you place your pads on top. Okay? You place your pads on top, and you work towards the center of the spill. Okay, so you work towards the center of the spill. Leave it there. Come back when it's absorbed. Depending on the material, if they're quite good to absorb material, you come back. What do you do then? Clean up the spill, put it into the bag provided, and then what do you do?
Dispose of it as per.
Dispose of the chemical waste as per the safety data sheet. What else do we do? Two more things to do.
We need to investigate why the spill happened.
Yeah, incident report, yeah.
And see if there's a likelihood of any more escaping. Where's it come from?
Yeah, so that would be your incident report investigation. And one last thing before break. What's the last thing you do? You replenish your spill kit. Okay, it's very important. You replenish the spill kit. That's good news. Okay, folks, that's it. After break, we're going to come back. We're going to do a quick case study. Any questions before break? No? Okay. Thanks very much, folks. We'll talk to you after break, okay? For the product. And we've identified the controls. Do you think, before we start, has anybody read it? You read it? Yeah? So do you think you could do a risk assessment based on this sheet of paper?
Well, you want to talk to the person using chemical.
Exactly. You know, that when you do a risk assessment, you really have to go and talk to the people, you know, who are doing the work. So even if you look at the transport of it, you know, for example, does it come in a lift? Do you know what I mean? So to look at the whole picture, whenever you complete a chemical risk assessment, you have to complete it. And I suppose one thing we find is that very often safety reps within the department are assigned to go off and do training on the completion of chemical risk assessments, and they say, well, I don't have time to do the risk assessment. But whether they are the person who does the risk assessment or they engage a consultant, they still have to spend the time with the consultant to complete the risk assessment. So you will always, the staff in the department will spend time involved in the completion of the risk assessments. So just to go through just the steps of completing a chemical risk assessment. So just to identify the hazards, first of all, assess the risks of the hazards, decide on what control measures are required based on what you see in front of you. Big things, ensure control measures are fully implemented. So very often people do the risk assessment, they identify these things need to be done, and then they say, great, the risk assessment is done, there they are in the folder, I show them to staff, but they don't follow up on the control measures. They come back a year later to review it and say, oh, I haven't that done. You know what I mean? And it just turns around and ends up as being a documented exercise. And finally then, just to record, so they should be documented. Chemical risk assessments must be documented and updated. So, just hazard identification. So when you look at the chemical, it's important to look at how it's used, stored, the waste, disposal of it, how it's transported, and also what to do in the event of emergency. But where do you get the information on the hazard? The best place is on the label of the chemical or on the safety data sheet. They will give you an idea of what are the hazards associated with the chemical. So if I was to do a risk assessment on acetic acid, what sections of the safety data sheet would I look to see what hazards are associated with the chemical? 2. And what else might you look at? In the safety data, what other section might you look at? Just from a hazards, sorry?
Storage.
You could, just talking specifically about the hazards of the chemical.
Might go to the ingredients.
Sorry? So maybe you might go and look at the toxicological information associated with the product. See if there's anything else about the hazards. It might have some information about carcinogen testing, see if it's a carcinogen. It's important. And depending on the chemical, then you may look at other things like websites, you could look at ECHA, you could look at basically industry, talk to other people who are engaged competent persons. So you may need to engage the services of an industrial hygienist. And an example of that would be in hospitals, in histology departments. In 2016, the OELV for formalin, which is used to fix specimens in histology departments, it was reduced from 2 parts per million. So for every million parts in the air, if the maximum you could be exposed to was 2, down to 0.2. So it was a 10-fold basically increase. So the control measures that were required were significant, and they had to engage services of competent persons to look at their ventilation, look at the engineering controls that were in place to bring them below the legal limit of 0.2 parts per million. So the first one is the identify the hazards, safety data sheet, label, and maybe other sources of information. The second part is to assess the risks of the hazards. And so what can you look at? You look at how many people are using it, what quantities are they using, how long are they using it for, and what are the routes of exposure. So it's exposure via eyes, skin, inhalation, ingestion. And then when you assess the risk, it's very important to take into account what current controls are in place. So a mistake I see with risk assessments is that they assess the risk with no controls, which just doesn't make sense to me, even though I see people doing that. They say, well, what would the risk be if I had no controls in place? But again, that's really a chemical right in front of you with no packaging. So important to look at, take into account what are the current controls I have in place. And the thing about that is to be honest. See what is there at the moment. If it says we're wearing safety glasses, well, are people wearing safety glasses? So to assess the risk, it's very important to take into account the control measures. And when we look at the risk, we look at, I'm not going to spend a lot of detail, I'm sure you're familiar with the risk, its severity and likelihood. But when it comes to the severity of a chemical, when you do a risk assessment, you generally can't affect much the severity of a chemical. If a chemical is corrosive, it's going to cause burns. And whether you have it in a closed system or you have it on an open bench, the severity of that chemical will still be a corrosive chemical that can cause burns. So for example, if you've got something that is corrosive, it might be up around 4. The only really way I see you can affect the severity is if you dilute the chemical or if you substitute it for a safer alternative. So when I do risk assessment, it's not very often the severity you can affect, but what you can affect is the likelihood of an incident. So if you have a person who is, let's say, cleaning an oven, they've no safety glasses, they've no gloves, and the ventilation isn't working, well then the likelihood of an incident is quite high. But if they have their current controls are do wear the correct gloves, the correct eye protection, they've done chemical safety awareness training, then the likelihood will be a lot lower. And that's really what you can affect when it comes to chemical safety, in my opinion, is the likelihood. So the likelihood then, so we know with risk matrix you multiply the likelihood by the severity, and what you're all trying to do is to move it to the what's called the low end. And as I say, you're mainly looking to move it towards looking at the likelihood. Again, but if you can substitute it or if you can eliminate the chemical, all the better, then you're moving it in this direction. Okay. So then you need to decide on what control measures are necessary. So how are you to improve the chemical? Once you've done chemical risk assessments the first time, you'll have them completed. And the biggest body of work is when you do them the first time. When you review them, there generally isn't a huge amount of work in maintaining them. But when you do a risk assessment, it's very often, you might need to find much difference, but it's sometimes a nugget of information you'll see. So something that might be seen in one product, in one SCS, has been a change. There's been a change in the OELV, for example, of a chemical. and that is a node of information that you may need to take significant actions. So sometimes reviewing risk assessment can be quite mundane, but you're looking for that maybe one or two things that can make a difference. And in a way, what are we looking to do with risk assessments? We're looking to continuously improve the safe use of those chemicals. The second, ensure that the control measures are fully implemented. So when you identify the action, we need to ensure that control measures are fully implemented, and basically assign somebody who's going to implement it, assign a date when it will be completed by, and then follow up. When you complete the risk assessment or chemical assessment the first time, you generally will actually have a good few improvements that you need to make. So very often it's good to put down the review date maybe 2 months or 3 months down the road, rather than going for a generic kind of 1 year, let's review it, to put a review date shortly after you've completed risk assessment, so you can follow up with the current controls. And then, very important for the Health and Safety Authority, if they come, or if you have an accident, that you have completed your documented risk assessments and that they are current. Very important as well that they are communication to staff, and again, there's a legal requirement to do that, to provide the information associated with the products. And very often I see that there's sometimes reluctance in companies to communicate that information, to make it available to staff. Well, what if this, what if that? But generally staff are adults. They accept the information and they will address it, and they appreciate that you're upfront with the information that you're sharing. Okay. So just important, as I say, that the information is shared. So we have a case study. So have you read the case study? All is good? How many changes or improvements to make to it? Lots. Okay. So how we do this, we're going to look at here, I'm just going to write down, we're going to look at the current controls. So when we look at the current controls, we're looking at the good things. So what are the good things they have in place? And then we're going to assign a risk rating. And then we're going to identify, okay, so what are the improvements that we can make? When we do risk assessments, I'm going to show you the completed risk assessment. For this, we look at the use, storage, transport, and disposal. Okay? So maybe we don't have to do it all now, but just see if we can maybe list out a few key things, assign a risk rating, and assign additional control measures. So what would you say are some of the current controls that they have in place for the use of the acetic acid? So they're using it in the lab. John is using it. What would you say are some of the current controls they have in place?
Fume hood.
They have a fume hood. So this is kind of an example of, but are they using it?
Not with it.
So is it a current control? Would you say it's in the risk assessment? Won't that be an additional control to the recommendation to improve? Okay, anyone else?
Lab coated gloves.
They have that, so for PPE, they wear lab coat and gloves, yeah?
Doesn't define if a lab coat is sufficient though. If it's a cotton one, you burn yourself through it.
But I suppose it's offering some protection. And I suppose the other thing is, like, you'd have to ask, you could say the question about the gloves. What are the gloves made of?
Latex.
Latex, so
look at the MSDS and see if latex is approved.
that's it. So, but the thing is, we're putting in what are the current controls. So what do we have now? Then we'll say, okay, so but the lab coat isn't the right lab coat. We'll see the gloves aren't it, and we'll relate that in the risk rating. So they do wear lab coat and latex gloves. Okay. What else do they have?
They have an SDS.
They have an SDS, yeah. And I agree to the SDS isn't necessary indeed, but they have an SDS. Would it be better to have an SDS that's out of date than have no SDS? Anything else? Of any of the sections?
Well, it says it's part of the process, but the process isn't defined, so you can't.
Don't have written documentation, yeah?
The signage on the storage, the closed storage.
Yeah, they have signage on the storage. Okay. And they also have a designated storage cabinet, don't they? Okay, so they have that. So it's rough, okay. And they also, I suppose, anything else?
It's not put down the same kind of store they dispose.
Yeah, so when they dispose of it in a container. What kind of container is it? Glass, is it? Or
Glass.
Glass, yeah. Okay.
In terms of the emergency response, they have first aid kit access.
Yeah, so they have first aid kit, very good.
Eye wash.
Eye wash station. Okay, this is rough now, but I read better it. Okay. They've done training. What training have they done? Fire safety and
hygiene and manual handling.
manual handling. Okay. Anything else?
They appear to have disposal procedures.
Okay, so they have procedures for disposal. Just let's put that in. Okay. The thing is, we get the thing. We put in what do we currently have in place now, and we're being honest. You know, if for example we put in use fume covered, then we don't use the fume covered, so it's not a control measure in place. So based on that, okay, what is the hazard of the chemical? What are the hazards associated with it? Corrosive and flammable. So what would you say the severity of it is?
High.
So it's high. So it's probably a 4-ish, would you say, yeah? And just roughly now again, we don't have to go into what would you say the likelihood of this incident is?
With the current controls.
With the, yes, so that's what we're taking. We're taking into account what are the current controls in place.
I go quite high.
Yeah, I would go quite high as well, yeah. So I'd possibly say a 4 or a 4, yeah. So it's a 16, and a 16 then would be, just in our criteria, would be a high risk. And it is. Listen, we look at the condition controls. Storage, and again, even though the designated cabinet, the hazard or the severity of this chemical is still a corrosive chemical, so I would say the severity is still a 4, but the likelihood of an incident happening when it's in the cabinet, it's a designated cabinet, you know what I mean, it might be a 1 or a 2. Would you agree?
No.
No? What do you think?
It's stored with another chemical.
Sorry?
It's stored with another chemical.
Is it? Okay, so it's stored with other chemicals, so therefore it mightn't be compatible with it, so yeah, so it might have to go with a 3 or a 4 maybe. Again, there's a high risk, yeah, okay. Okay, again it's high. The transport of it,
It's a bit too vague for me.
it's too big, the 20 litres that,
Well, no, it's vague. It's very
Yeah.
vague. It arrives with the supplier and it goes by porters and there's no more. It doesn't
that's
tell
exactly
you.
it. There's not enough information really to determine with it. But let's just, so we possibly don't have enough information on it, so it's a good point. That's what my point is about doing a risk assessment. You really need to be there. And then disposal of it, okay, so when we look at disposal of it, it's more or less the same controls as for use when you're disposing of it, isn't it really? They don't have all these in place when we're disposing of it. So it's probably a 4 by 4 again. It's equal to 16. Okay. So when we look at the risk rating, it's very important to take into account what are the current controls, and based on the current controls, assign a risk rating. Okay. So once we've identified the risk rating, we want to reduce that risk rating. And how do we do that? We do that by implementing additional controls. So let's look at the use. What additional controls do you think we should do for this process? What can we look at?
When he labels it. Yeah.
Sorry? Eyewear, yeah? Okay, goggles, very good.
4 big gloves.
Yeah, so what we would say, whatever gloves are in section 8 of the safety dash sheet, so change to nitrile gloves, let's say, or is it butyl rubber gloves, I'm not sure. Change glove type.
Do they need to be wearing some form of apron if your lab coat isn't sufficient?
Yeah, so they could be decanting it, so it could be to use a disposable nitrile apron. Very good.
Then labelling and identification within the lab, putting CH3 CCOH solution.
Yeah, so
It's
hazard
okay
label.
for somebody that knows that, but for me walking in, that means nothing.
Okay, very good. Okay, anything else?
Because they're decanting it into another container, they need to transfer all the hazards and the labeling.
Yeah, okay, so hazard labeling on the containers and in the containers that they transfer into. Very good, yeah.
The troughs as well.
Yeah, what's wrong with the troughs?
They're not labelled and they're.
Well, they're open and remain on the bench for the day.
So the troughs, so what do we need to do with the troughs? What are the additional control measures we need to put in place?
It doesn't tell you if they're on a safe table that has some form of bunding or something, so if a trough's knocked over, where's that liquid going?
Okay, but what does it say in it about the trough itself? It's
Not covered.
It's not covered, so we could look at covered in the trough. And where could we possibly put the trough?
Fumes.
We could put it in a fume cupboard. we could also actually carry out the dilution in the fume cupboard. So we could use fume cupboard and cover the tray. Okay. There's two big things we could probably look at. If we were to go up the hierarchy of controls.
Chemical training.
Yeah, that's another one. There's no chemical training. Very good, yeah. But even go up higher. Chemical safety training. What else? What about the SDS?
Up-to-date one.
I know, get an up-to-date SDS, yeah. Okay.
Probably wants to be an eye wash station and first aid kit in the lab, not in an office.
Very good.
It wants to be there on site.
Yeah. One of the biggest things, just on the side, one of the biggest things I see when it comes to spill kits is where do people very often store the spill kits?
Under benches.
Away.
And the cabinets?
In the chemical cabinets. Yes. Yeah. Very often people store the spill kits in the chemical cabinets. What's wrong with that? The spill, you can't access the spill kit. We're still looking for two, I would say, key things that we could look at here for this chemical or this process.
Maybe just buy a more dilute solution.
Excellent. Maybe we could buy the solution pre-diluted, so that would eliminate the actual process. So excellent. Okay, so buy pre-dilute, dilute acetic acid. Okay, that's excellent. Okay, and there's something about just let's say if we can't buy a dilute. Just what's anything there about the process of how we're diluting it? Anything you can improve there? Possibly, yeah. Okay, what are we doing? What are we actually doing when we're diluting them? We're adding what to what?
Yeah. Put the water into the acetic, not the
Yes,
acetic.
so what way should it be? We should add, rather than adding the water to the acetic, add the acetic to the water. Okay, so very important. So if there's a splash, like you've splashed, as you add acetic, it's being diluted immediately. Okay, so you could just review the procedure. Okay, so when I come to look at these changes, are they all fairly reasonably practical? So when we do risk assessment, we look at stuff that is reasonably practical. So and all these here are reasonably practical. They're quite straightforward to implement. There's no science, and in generally, it's just looking at what we have and seeing. Okay, so what could we do to improve it? Okay.
The storage is a segregation.
Segregation, yeah. So what does it say? It's stored with, what is it stored with?
Acids in the base.
And acids in base. What do we need to do? Segregate them out. So we need to storage, segregate acids, and alkalides. Okay, very good. Anything else about the storage? Are we signage, the correct signage?
It says close of storage, but it doesn't.
Okay, so but what should you really put up in it?
Acids only.
Well, you would, normally I would say to put the two hazards. So it's both flammable and corrosive. So I put up the two hazards of the chemical as such. Okay, the transport we don't know a lot about, and then the disposal of it. A lot of these control measures will repeat down here because you're, the likes of the PPE, things like that. And anything else about the disposal? Is there anything you think they're doing wrong with disposal?
Yeah, you need to just put in chemical waste. You need to assign whether it's acid.
Yeah.
What's going in there? Is it correct for carrying that particular product?
Yeah. So classify, review packaging, and also ultimately probably review disposal route. Yeah.
Yeah, waste.
Does it need to be glass?
Sorry?
If it needs to be in glass?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And you've got to think of when you dispose of waste, you've got to think of the onward journey. So this is being transported by road. Very often it's transported to, let's say, the likes of Germany or Belgium for incineration. So is it you may need to put into special packaging that you may need to contact your chemical disposal company. So I suppose the whole idea there is to give you the gist of it. Like if we implement those control measures, what would the severity be then? Excluding the one about diluting the product. So if we don't find a dilute version of the product, what would you say is the severity?
Still quite the same.
It's still 4. It's still the same chemical, okay? It'll still burn your eyes and burn skin. But what would you say is the likelihood? Induced significantly. So it probably you're looking at the end of, you're looking at a 4, probably maybe by a 1 or a 2 probably, because it's still a very manual process, will give you maybe an 8. So in this case we reduce it from a high maybe to a medium rating. Okay. So again, you may not come all the way, but what you're looking to do when you do risk assessments is continuously improve the completion of the safe use of the chemicals. Okay. So I suppose after that then, you'll assign who's going to do all these things, and then when will they be completed by, and then you probably would need to follow up by saying I'm going to follow up in 2 months' time and to review this risk assessment again. And once they're completed, they will move over to current controls. A lot of them will. So staff wear goggles, we have a different glove type, we have hazard labeling on the containers. So they'll move over here and you'll reduce the number of additional controls required. Once you've completed one sunset, you'll probably have very little in your additional controls. But the thing is to find those nuggets then. What are the things that will make a difference for the safe use of those chemicals when you review possibly legislation or storage requirements or the classification of the chemical or a state data sheet has been updated. Okay, so that's, any questions on risk assessments? Do we find it useful? Yeah? Okay, so that actually finishes up with me. So I'm going to hand you over now to Dermot, who's going to take you through some of the state action management and I think product chemical.
So, thanks Henry for that. Okay, so just to tell you where I'm coming from, so guys, this, as I say here, Henry's gone through the technical side there, what we need to do, how we should do it, etc. I'm coming at it from a different side. Basically what I talked about is how we should go out and implement what Henry has told us to do. I.e., essentially mainly around your safe data sheet management, your chemical labeling risk assessments, how you write them, how you collect them, and then how you distribute them to your staff. I'm not a chemical safety specialist, I'm a software engineer. I've been with DCM for the last 15 years. I spent initially, so it's been about 10 years, writing various systems to help with different parts of chemical safety. But really what this is based on is the last 2 or 3 years. The last 2 or 3 years, I've been working mainly in sales. And I visited probably 200-300 different sites across Ireland, across the UK, talking about chemical safety management systems. And this presentation is really based on the best and the worst of what I've seen out there. I would say the difference between maybe what I'm talking about here and versus what Henry's saying, a lot of what Henry's saying is, it is legislation, it is saying, this is what you have to do. What I'm looking at here is the best practices that I've seen in terms of how you go about implementing that. This is very much open for discussion. So I really would welcome anyone, anything that I recommend. If you say, well, we do it this way, this might work better. Again, that's how this has come about. Literally, just even last week, I added a whole new slide list based on a time that was at down in Bristol. So, this is something that's evolving the whole time. This wee slide here is basically just at the very start talking the difference between a safe data sheet and a chemical agent risk assessment. It might seem very obvious, and to be fair, it is. The reason this is here is not really so much for you guys. How many people here have heard of COSH? So COSH basically is the UK legislation, and that is their equivalent of a chemical agent risk assessment. And for travelling in the UK, people have COSH on braille. And the first thing they'll go out and say, I need my COSH assessments, where are my COSH sheets, where are my COSH sheets? And very often they don't even know the safe data sheet exists in the first place. I do find, in general, in Ireland, there's a better understanding that people understand I have to get my SDS first, and then I go and write my chemical agent risk assessment. But just to be clear in terms of the difference between the two, so your safe data sheet, that is the 16-section document created by the manufacturer. It outlines what the hazards are, etc., etc. And what you get in Ireland, it will be done to European standard, as Henry outlined. What your chemical agent risk assessment then is, that is something that you have to do in your own site. And that's where you implement, you look at what the best practice, what's recommended in the safe data sheet, you look at your processes, and as Henry has done here, you come up with, well, how can we use this chemical safely here? You will still see, and again it's a UK thing, some manufacturers, you can go to their websites and download a COSH assessment for the product. And that is just horrendous, absolutely horrendous, because that is completely taking away from the point of doing the assessment. You need to look at how you use it on your site and how you can use it safely. So, what I'm going to look at here is these, I think there's 8 steps here in terms of, 8 and twice. But basically in terms of, these are just the steps that from the very beginning, when you go to sit down and say, okay, we're going to get our chemical safety in order, where do you start and where do you finish up again? The first one is document your structure. And this, again, anything I'm saying here, a lot of it is very obvious. And a lot of this you'll say, well, I noticed that. You might pick up bits and pieces, but why do you think that I felt the need to put that up there?
A lot of it is about procurement as well. Do you know what I mean? Like the people who use the chemicals might not have the choice or any influence in the chemicals just get sent out from head office or something like that. So the person who buys the chemicals would be included on that, I would think.
Yeah, they definitely would. But why do you think that when you go down, sit down to write down or get your chemical safety in order, why do you think that I felt the need to actually put out and say, well, first thing you do is list out all the departments you have.
You don't leave anything out, I suppose.
Exactly, because
It's close to it.
yeah, because one of the, and this is a thing you'll hear me say over the next few minutes or over the next couple of slides so much is one of the most common mistakes I see. And in this case, one of the most common mistakes I see is I come in here to write risk assessments for the hotel or look at the chemical safety for the hotel. And the first question I ask myself is, okay, well, where do we have chemicals? And I say, well, I know the cleaning staff have them, I know they have them in the pool. Okay, so let's look at those areas. But straight away, I've made the decision that's where the chemicals are. Don't think about your chemicals at all. Right now, what are all the areas we have? Okay, we've got a golf course. And I don't presume there's chemicals out there. We'll go in there, we'll talk to people in the golf course and see what's out there. So before you even think about chemicals, you write down what are all the departments we have. And then you start looking then and seeing where the chemicals are. The next thing then is assign roles. And this again is something I'm going to come back to over and over again. And this, and all you guys I'm sure would agree, as much as possible for all types of health and safety, you have to involve the people that are as close to the process and as close to the chemicals as possible. So in this case, when you have your departments together, you have to get, I was trying to recommend that you get one person at least in each of those departments to say, well, you are the chemical safety champion, or you are going to be in charge of chemical safety. And of course, you have to set it in a way they're not taking massive responsibility. The main point is that they are the person, they are the go-to person, they are going to keep the inventory up to date, they are going to lead the area. It can't come from you as an EHS person going down to the golf club, you're sorting it out and going back again, and they don't do anything until you come down again. There has to be someone within each of those departments, and they are made responsible for it in their area. So the second thing then is build your inventory. So we have our list of departments, we have our guy or girl in each department. The next thing we need to do is, well, okay, find out now what chemicals do we have. Before you go out to try and build your inventory, design a simple template that you send out to everyone, or that everyone has to build their inventory. Again, it's quite common sense, but such a mistake that I see when people send us on inventories, they may have 7 or 8 different formats. You'll have a Word document, you'll have an Excel, you'll have something that will have written it out and scanned it in. There'll be different formats and there'll be different levels of information in it. And it's going to be a huge body of work then to try and pull all that together and make sense of it. But just at the very start, you design a template that says, well, this is the information we're going to need. What information do we need to collect at this point?
Names of chemicals.
Yeah, so the product name,
Quantities.
Supplier.
yeah, supplier or the manufacturer. The manufacturer is even more important than supplier. What you need to think of when you're at this point is, what is the information that I will need if I go to get a safety data sheet? So I will need the full product name. Again, a common mistake that we'll see, as you can see there, is bleach. As you guys know, even if you go down to your local super value, there's probably 20 or 30 different grades, blends of bleach, etc. You need the full product name so that we're getting a safe data sheet and ultimately then completing a risk assessment on exactly what we have. The full manufacturer name, preferable to the supplier. Because again, the supplier may supply a couple of different brands of it. The supplier is not necessarily the best person to go to for a safe data sheet, which I'll come to in a minute, but the full product name and the product manufacturer is the key information you need when you go source for SDS. And finally, then I put in product codes. How many people here have some kind of a laboratory on site? So we're buying the likes of Sigma or VWR, etc. So when you're dealing with that, with any kind of laboratory chemicals, I would say from the very start when you're building your inventory, product codes are key. So if you're looking at Sigma VWR products, the product code is the key bit of information you need, because if I go to VWR tomorrow to look for an SDS for acetone, they probably have 200 different grades, strengths, etc. of acetone. Whereas if I have the product code of exactly what I buy, I can go in and get exactly the right SDS. The last point then, just on building your inventory. So I would definitely try and get those people in their own departments, make them responsible for putting their own inventory together, and pull that all together then in one central point afterwards. So it's critical to make them responsible, but to have one central point back to you or back to the EHS department where I know what's in the whole organisation. The next step then is you need to go and source your safe data sheets. And I would recommend that is done centrally. And I would strongly recommend it, no matter what system that you are using. Why do you think I would recommend that, as opposed to getting people in their individual departments getting their own safe data sheets?
Different versions.
Yeah.
Everyone knows where to go to get that data sheet. Essentially, you might know in your department where to get it, but if it's a central source, you can source them all there.
Yeah, the main thing is it's a duplication of work. In that you will find it's a duplication of work in an obvious way. First of all, for products, we have WD-40 here in the hotel, and we use it in 3 different departments. But we don't want 3 different people going off sourcing that safe data sheet. Let's just get it once and give it to everyone who needs it. But also, the less obvious one then is manufacturers. The biggest work in sourcing safe data sheets isn't actually getting the document. It is actually figuring out per manufacturer, how do I get that document? So if, for example, we have products from Sigma, well, we know we go to that website, maybe we need a login to the website, etc. So you don't want 3 or 4 people doing that. Let's go to Sigma once and get the 25 products that we have across 3 departments, and let's get them all at once. The other thing that we have found, unfortunately, is if you're pushing it out on individual departments to get their own safe balance sheets, I've seen it so many times, it just does not get done. You'll have a certain number of departments that will keep them up to date and keep them well, but you'll always have some that don't. And they're the ones that are, going to hold you back in an audit, in terms of an incident, etc. If you put them together centrally and put a plan in place to manage them centrally, I've always found it just works so much better. Source direct from manufacturers. Again, a common mistake I see is people go to supplier, but you're then counting on that supplier having the current safe balance sheet. So if I'm buying maybe a Sigma product from Bob's Chemicals, Bob may have got the SDS from Sigma 4 years ago and he hasn't updated it. So if I go to Bob for the SDS, I'll get a 4-year-old one. Even if you're dealing with a supplier, you find out who the manufacturer is and go direct to manufacturers, because that's where you can get the most up-to-date SDS. And finally then, just record basic information. So as you get the SDSs in, 2 key bits that I've noted here is first of all the revision date, and obviously that tells you, what version of the SDS you have, etc. But the second one, which may not be so obvious, is when you get SDSs in, particularly by a manufacturer, is record how did you get it and where did you get it. Why do we want to record that? Does anyone know? Because in 12 months' time, when you need to update that SDS, or in 6 months' time when you get a new product into that manufacturer, and maybe someone else that's sourcing the safe balance sheets, you don't want to have to go through all that work again. They just go up and they see, well, okay, Sigma, here's the username and password, that's where I go, and they go and get it. And it's avoiding duplication of work as new products come in, but also as SDSs are updated over time. So, you've got your departments, you've got people within them, they've given you your inventories, and you've gone out to write your safe balance sheets. Sorry, you've gone out to source your safe balance sheets. You then now need to sit down and write your chemical data risk assessments, or you need to get them together. Again, a very, very common mistake that I see is people will start about writing their assessments, they will go maybe to the HSA website or maybe get a corporate template, but they will get a template and start writing their assessments day one. Before you start writing your assessments, look at the template and see, is this template right for me? And customize it so that it works for you. And you're trying to customize it in 2 ways. First of all, you're trying to customize it so that it fits your needs. Is it covering all the areas that you need in your business? But secondly, you're trying to customize it so that it's efficient. You don't want to have a 4 or 5 page assessment that is completely manual, because it's going to take too much time to fill in, and ultimately it's not going to be done. So take a bit of time at the start to get a template that works for you and to set it up. The first way of saying it is keep it simple. An overly complex template, and this would be for any type of risk assessment, whether like chemical or just general health and safety. An overly complex template will fail every single time. The amount of companies that we've gone into, and I would see maybe 4 or 5 page assessments that have been done by people with the best of intentions, but they are just never going to be filled in, and they're never going to be kept up to date. You need to keep it simple as possible and keep it relevant. Use as much multiple choice as possible. So when you go about writing your template, in every section I would say, can you see, well, how many options do I have here? And the one that I would always use as an example that Henry was doing here is spill control. So if a spill happens here in this hotel today, there's only a limited number of things that people can do, okay? So maybe use the spill kits that are stored in the maintenance cabinet. Contact reception on this number. So rather than leave that with free text, which will encourage, first of all, it will be slow, and very often encourages copy and paste from an SDS, build your template in a way that you pre-fill in what those options are, and so people can take off then the ones that are relevant to them. And what that does is, first of all, it controls quality. So basically, it means that people are only putting in stuff that is pre-approved by you. They're not making recommendations. So I'm not going to say, copies of the SDA to say, use vermiculite to clean it up, if vermiculite is not available here. So I'm only putting in recommendations that are actually approved within the organisation. And secondly, obviously, it makes it much quicker and easier to fill in. The last thing I've said here, and it's a small one, and it was a client that pointed out to me, and I thought it was a very good idea. Put your brand on the template. Why would I recommend that? Or can anyone give an idea why that would be useful?
Just kind of personalise it, kind of, you know, like the company, I suppose, doesn't it? Brand.
Yeah. Any other reasons?
Ownership.
Yeah, that's definitely one. Give ownership. So when people look at that document, they know this is an internal company document. We've taken ownership of this. This is our document. Any other reason? Go back to my very first slide in terms of, and as I said, I do see it as more of a problem in the UK, but it differentiates between this document and the SDS. So people know the SDS will have various different logos on it from manufacturers, etc. But the document with our company logo up in the top left, that's always my chemical age risk assessment. And as you said, it highlights ownership. It's saying this is an internal document written by us, not written by a manufacturer. I'm going to skip through this bit very quickly because Henry's kind of covered this already. Just the key elements that you need to include in your template when you are designing it. A description of the process, the required control measures, and I don't think kind of in reverse order in terms of the ones that I see missed out most often. So these are the ones that people generally do include. The occupation exposure limits, but then the last two are the two that I see most commonly missed out. So the rating, and I know this is one that drives Henry particularly cracked when he sees them being left out is, you know, the rating is, you cannot have a risk assessment without some kind of rating. And it is, whether it is a 5x5 matrix or a 3x3 or something like this, it is a quick and a visual way to just get the message across to the user to say, this is where we feel this fits in. This is how hazardous this is. And the last bit then that I would say is key, and probably the bit that is most commonly left out of chemical risk assessments, is somewhere where you're putting in improvements. So by leaving that out, you're completely missing the whole point of the assessment in the first place. The point of a chemical agent risk assessment, like any assessment, is that you're reviewing how do we carry out this process and can we do it any safer. Whereas I see so many templates and all there is how are we currently doing this process. But there's nothing put in to say, well, how are we going to improve it? So as I said, it's the most common bit that's missed out, and by missing out that you really are missing out on the entire point of it in the first place. Is that okay? So what I've outlined here is, so at this point now, we have our template, we have our safe analysis broken down by department, and we're going to set out now to write our chemical agent risk assessments. And what I've put together here, and it's not also black and white, I've put together 4 different options in terms of who the people are that could go and write your risk assessments. And I'd like a bit of feedback from yourselves in terms of how you feel they are they the right people or not to do them. So their first one is that they're completed by EHS with no input from staff. Now when I say EHS, I mean maybe the likes of yourselves who are maybe an EHS manager within the company, or EHS could be an external person that you get in. So the EHS, they just, from their office, they write the chemical agent risk assessment and they get no input from staff. How do we feel about that?
It should be a joint thing, I think.
Yeah, it really is. It's a waste of time. It is only a purely documentation exercise. You're creating something to stick in a drawer, and it's by far the least recommended option. You're creating a document, and you're not actually assessing it. You're only writing a document. The second one then is completed by the staff with no input from EHS. How would people feel? So I get maybe people in every individual department in this hotel to go and write their own chemical agent risk assessments. How would people feel about that?
I see.
Yeah, absolutely. So like, it would be, if they're to do it right, all these people would have to be trained. So it's going to be very resource efficient. So you're going to have a properly trained person in every department in this hotel. And as, sorry, I don't know your name, but as you said, you're going to have inconsistencies. You're going to have the chap out on the golf course, maybe he's going to take it seriously and he's going to do them right. The girl in the pool may not take it so seriously, and maybe someone in the catering may just skim through them in 5 minutes, and you're going to have inconsistencies the whole way. It's not as bad as number one, because at least the staff have been involved, but it's very resource heavy, and you're going to have inconsistencies throughout. So the third option then is completed by EHS in conjunction with staff. So the EHS person, again, whether it's a full-time person or whether it's someone coming in, they get the template, they go down to the golf course, they meet the guys, the girls down there, and they go through the process with them, and they get an assessment out of the other end. How do you feel about that? So the staff have been involved, so they're going to feel some ownership of it, and ideally, as I said there, you do it down in the environment. You don't put them into the boardroom or into the meeting and say, let's do it in here. You go down to the golf course, you go down to the pool, and you look at, well, where are your gloves? Show me the storage cabinet. And we walk around and we write it there together. So they have ownership of it. They have ultimately written it while you were there. And the last one then is really quite similar, but just coming the other way around. So let the staff write it themselves. So they actually go out and write it, but they don't sign off. So they write it up to the point where maybe it's ready to go, but the EHS person then comes in, reviews, and signs off before it goes live. How do you feel about number 4?
They need to be aware of the hazards too. And the
Yeah.
risks and chemicals.
Yeah. Otherwise you have to go back again and do it again, and like it depends the level of knowledge and skills that your staff have. Sure,
Yeah.
with very basic operations and they don't even know what a second data sheet is.
Yeah.
It's going to be very hard to do that.
Yeah, it will, but at least compared to option 2, they have that backup. And what I would say about this is, there definitely will be some training required, but it can probably be done internally, because they're not going to be signing off, so it'll be something that you can train them on internally, and obviously EHS are going to sign off on them. So 3 and 4 are quite similar. The only difference is obviously the EHS person isn't going right down there. So like, of those 4 different options, and I know you can probably maybe go in between, but of those 4, like, these 2 will be the 2 that we'd most recommend. So, and the main bit that's coming out of both of them is, you have the staff involved, and you have the experts, i.e. the EHS involved. And they're the 2 key elements that you need. Okay, any questions or comments on any of that? Okay. So, when you go to writing your assessments, again, this is all quite common sense-ish, but just to highlight a few bits. First of all, training. You have to ensure that whoever's writing the assessment, whatever part that they're doing, whether it's signing off or whether it's writing the initiative, have they got the right training to do it. Secondly, and Henry touched on this, and again, this is such a common mistake that we see, is people will do part 1, they maybe even go out and get people fully trained to write chemical age assessments, but they then do not give them the time to actually do it. So you'll get maybe shift managers or supervisors, they will release maybe 2 people to go on a course, but that's the input. They don't give them 2 hours a day to actually write the assessment. So you have to put in time, you actually have to schedule in time. These are my 2 hours a day, this is my 1 day a week, whatever it is, the time that is required to actually complete the assessment. The last bit then is, whatever way you're doing it, and as I said, you do need to involve a team as much as possible, is you don't just go out, write all your assessments, and then come back to the very end and review them all together. Share knowledge as you do it. So get together as a team. It doesn't have to be a big, half day, 4 hours together. Get together for 10 or 15 minutes. Just share. What are the common issues you've come across? Well, we have a big problem with storage in the lab. Well, maybe the guys in shipping have a cabinet that they're using. Have you a query that you're not sure of? Bring it to the team, and we'll all learn from it together. Also, the big part is, and again, this is going back to what Henry said, and it's a problem that we see a lot, is part of this team meeting should be, are we closing out the actions? So the improvements that we've noted, the same improvement on every risk assessment that we do week on week on week? Or are we getting together and saying, well, okay, what are the major improvements we need to do? Well, if we maybe got somebody in to look at storage, maybe for 1 or 2 days, that's going to knock out maybe 50-60% of the problems we have. So rather than going off and writing 10 more assessments and noting the same thing, let's close them out as we go along and make sure that they are all being closed out. So we now have our inventory together. It's broken out by department. The safe dashes are there, the risk assessments are there, and like it is just crazy the amount of sites I go to where they'll do all that and they'll shove in a drawer in EHS and that's the end of it. There is no point in doing all that if you're not actually taking that and giving it to people, because that is the point of it. You're collecting all this so that it is available to your staff. So who needs it? So basically, safe data sheets and risk assessments, they need to be available to the staff that are going to be exposed to the chemicals. So basically they need to be everyone. How are you going to do it? So soft copies ideally distribute maybe via your internal network, whether it's a folder. In an ideal situation, you do it through some kind of document management system if you have it available to you, so that you can manage version control, you can make sure that they only have the current version available to them, etc. You can keep archived versions, etc. as well. So that's ideally through that, but at the very least, make them available to everyone through a shared network. When then do you think we need hard copies? Who needs hard copies and when do you think we need them?
You have access to the internet or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so like basically there's, you know, and again, I would say you use hard copies as little as possible.
They're useful in the event of an emergency, though, okay, to lay your hands on it and bring it to the hospital or something like
Yeah.
that. And that's kind of useful.
Yeah, it is useful to have it like that. The only problem with, and this goes for all types of documentation, the very minute you print it, it starts going out of date. So you keep your hard copies to a minimum, but then you can't ignore the fact that there are some cases where you just have to have them. And like as I said, as you said, sometimes people just do not have access to a computer, they do not have access to a network, so they're going to have a hard copy there of them. If you are putting hard copies in place, you just have to put strict procedures in place to make sure that they are kept up to date. Again, it's so common that we see, you know, we would go in and we would see a nice online system, maybe where there are folders or Excel files for all your safe data and risk assessments, but yet we'll go down then into maybe the floor and we'll see a folder with safe data sheets on it that are 10 years old, and that's what people are working on. So you have to put strict procedures in place to keep those hard copies up to date, and keep hard copies to a minimum as much as possible. And finally then, so the last step in this, and again, it's crazy the amount of times it's overlooked, and that is where people will look at this as a project. So they will say, lads, we need to get our safe dashes up to date, we need to get our chemical aid and risk assessments written. They may get in a consultant to help them, they may just take time to do it. But they see it as a project, and they don't, when they're finished, they draw a line in the sand, and then move on to the next thing. And there's no procedures put in place to actually keep it up to date once it's done. So in 12 or 24 months' time, someone's going to have to start from scratch again. So as part of doing this, you have to put procedures in place that are going to keep it up to date now that it's actually done. And I broke it out into two. So first of all, the existing products that you have. So the products that you have, and you've written your assessments for source safe dashes for now. So put something in place that safe dashes that you're checking, ideally maybe on an annual basis, that you're just going out and checking, is that still the current SDS? Like, manufacturers are required to send you the current SDS. And the vast majority of cases, they will do it. But who do they send it to? They might email it to procurement, they might email it to you, or as very often will happen, they will actually print them out and stick it into the box and pallet wrap the whole thing up and send it on to you. Shipping will get it and they'll do it. So is it going to get to the place that it's meant to? And we would say, the ideal way is you reach out once a year and you check, have you still got the current one there? Also with that, you have to archive the old. So when you get a new one, you can't just dump the old one. You must keep that on file. So put a system in place that the old ones are kept and ensure that it is only the current one that we see. So again, I've seen it so many times where people give us a folder of, when we go to set them up, they give us a folder these are 100 safe data sheets that we have here, and you will see 5 different versions built up over the years of the same product. So they've got the new safe data sheet, but they haven't taken the old one out. So when somebody goes to get the SDS for WD-40, they could get the current one, or they could get the 15 one. And your chemical risk assessments, again, just put procedures in place so that they're reviewed, maybe on an annual basis, but very important, if the SDS is updated, the risk assessment is updated as well. And again, it is just put that procedure in place to make sure that it is checked. Also then for new products, so put something in place, and this has to go right back to those chemical people in those departments. They have to let you know if something new comes into their department. They have to flag to say, well, okay, this is new, so that's going to kick off. The SDS has to be sourced, the risk assessment has to be written. But nothing will happen if it's not added into your inventory in the first place. So hold a procedure in place that if a new chemical comes in, it has to go up there. A lot of the times I see this being managed maybe through procurement, which is okay in its own way because that maybe will identify when something new comes on site. But I would push it out further to the departments. It may come on site, but we want to know, is it in the golf club, is it in the pool, or where is it? And with that, so when a new product comes in, ideally the SDS should come in before it comes on site. And I know in a lot of organisations I see that they would put procedures in place that the person who's actually bringing in the new product, they go and get the SDS. Which I think, to be honest, is quite good, because you're actually forcing that person to stop and think and look at what hazard they're bringing in, as opposed to just bringing it in and then shoving it over to someone else to do it. And similarly with the chemical risk assessment, that needs to be written as much as possible before the product comes on site. Now sometimes that's not always possible because you need to look at the process, but if we take the case that we bring in a chemical, so the chemical is now here, it's here for 2 weeks, we then go and get the SDS, and a week later we go and write the risk assessment, and we find that this is a carcinogen and it's been used in the laboratory and people have been exposed to it for the last 3 weeks. So you need to get as much of this in place as possible before the chemical actually comes on site. So just to review, just the key points I would say for a good system. The first one would be, keep all aspects of it as simple and as easy to manage as possible. And I know, I might look at what I've gone through there, I get a long-winded way of putting out maybe the best and worst that I've seen. But when you're putting it together, keep it as simple as possible. The big thing that will force it, that a C system that is fall down is complexity. 4 people need to sign off on it there. It needs to pass through these. It gets caught, this person this, that person this. Keep it simple in all aspects as much as possible. Ensure what you're doing is relevant to your staff. Make sure you're not just creating generic risk assessments, you're not just getting SDS for products that you don't have. Only work on information that's relevant to your staff. Don't have them inputting information that is not relevant, or don't you be inputting information that's not relevant. And that goes back to the risk assessment template. Only work on what's actually relevant to you. I've said this so many times already, but staff involvement is key. And look, as I said, that goes for all aspects of health and safety. If you're going down telling them, you must wear this glove, and then you're going out the door again, nothing has got home. You need to be with them, and we come to the decision together. We look at the SDS, we look at the hazards, and we say, well, will we agree that this is the glove to wear? And we all agree. And they're much more likely to do that than me going down and actually tell them. So staff involvement is key in every aspect, and they have to take ownership of themselves. And the last bit, and it goes back to the last slide I finished up on, don't just take this as a project. Don't take it as a project to get this up to date today and then draw a line in the sand and move on. You have to take it that you put something in place, get it up to date now, but put something in place to keep it up to date so that you're not going to go back there again. Does anyone have any questions on that? And then I've gone through there. Does that all make sense? So what I have here just very briefly then is I have 3 or 4 slides based on the KenDoc. So I mentioned it a few times in terms of KenDoc. So what KenDoc is the chemical safety management system that we've designed. And we wrote it initially ourselves through our work in the hospitals. We wrote it for our own staff, and we built it up then over the years, as I said, based on the likes of those clients that we're visiting and seeing what do they require. What does KenDoc do? what I wanted to hear first is the pain points. So these are the kind of things that when I go into a client, these are the kind of problems that they're having, that they're saying, why am I there in the first place? You're there because X, Y, and Z. The common ones are, first of all, you go into a client, safe dashes are out of date. You're going in, the safe dashes are 5, 6 years old, and they just don't have time to get them up to date. They have a manual or a cumbersome form for managing their risk assessments. So maybe they have a 3 or 4 page document. Every risk assessment takes an hour to do, and it's killing them. The whole thing is falling down. They have a poor system, and again, this one really surprised me in terms of the amount of companies that we went to, and they are doing everything right up to the point of they're not distributing them. And they have no system in place to distribute. And it can be an easy one for me to see, but like, you have people, you have companies where you'll have maybe 4 or 5 guys and girls on the road, maybe field engineers, you'd have staff that don't have access to the internet, etc., etc., etc. And so there's no system in place that ensures that everyone has access to these. A lack of a standard system across our organisation. And this goes back to the sourcing of safe data and the doing everything collaboratively together. I find it in organisations with multiple sites, which you even find in organisations just at a single site and multiple departments. So you have Department A, they may have a great process in place, safe dashes are there, risk assessments are all up to date. Department B may have another good system in place, everything is working there, but they're not talking to each other. They repeat work between them, and there's no collaboration. The time and resources involved in ensuring compliance, and this goes on to the next part as well. Like, we do very little work in the chemical industry, because generally in the chemical industry, they have a chemical safety specialist, someone like Henry, full-time doing this, because they can afford to do that. Our work, a lot of our clients are in the likes of food manufacturing, county councils, hospitals, etc., where chemical safety is just a tiny part of their job. They have so much else to look at. So, and in terms of like where we come in, is like they have so much time, so much else to look at, and they can't afford to waste time going to Bob's Chemicals looking for safe data sheets and creating templates, managing folders, etc. It's just not an efficient use of their time. And sorry, the last thing on that I would say is a lot of our best customers, when you go into them first, are the ones that already have a good system in place. And the reason that is, you go into a client and they'll show you, they may have a wee Excel file, the products are listed out, the hazards are there, it links off the risk assessments, links off the safe data sheets. And I used to think initially, why am I here? You have this like under control. And the last thing they tell you after showing you all that is, they say, this is the bane of my life. Because they're the customer, they know how much work is involved in it. Sometimes you go into clients and things are a mess, but they're still sometimes fooling themselves saying, but I know if it's been a day or two in this, I'll get on top of it. Whereas the ones that have good systems in place know, well, there's a lot of work to get at this point. The last one, the second last one there's no handle on the hazards that are on site. So like, you go out and would say, you write your chemical risk assessments, you source your safe dashes, all the documentation is there. But yet if I go to you then tomorrow, and I say, look, I'm working in the micro lab, and my dermatitis is acting up, I've got a rash in my hand. Can you tell me, what skin sensitizer do we have here? Or I'm working down in theatre, and I'm expecting a wee baby. Do we know what pregnancy hazards are down there? So, even though we have all the documentation done, we've no place that we can go to actually collate and pull together and say, well, where are these hazards? Do we know what we have inside? And do we know what we need to start eliminating? And it kind of ties into the last one. So like, the most common pain point then is, it pulls into, there's no overall picture of where we are. So even if there are some departments doing stuff well, there is documentation here, there's more there. But I as an EHS manager, or I have no idea, where do we stand on site? So if someone comes in to look at me, to audit me tomorrow, or ask me questions tomorrow, I can't actually give a definite answer and say, this is where we are today. So the kind of work we do, first of all, as part of KMAP, we provide an SDS management service. You give us the list of products we have, so that inventory I talked about, where you break down your products by department, we go out and get all those safe dashes for you. We go direct to manufacturers, and once we have the SDSs there, we go back at least once a year and we check, is that still the current one that's there? We check compliance. So we check, once we get the SDS in, we check, is this a proper GHS compliant SDS? If it is, we'll put it up and it'll be marked as being approved. If it's not, we'll mark it as being unapproved. Sorry, we'll still put it up in the system, but we will mark it as being unapproved. So, going back to a question that was asked earlier on, we can't force manufacturers to have proper safe data sheets, but we can give you the information where the gaps are, and you can make your decisions then based on that. And finally then, we collect certain information off the SDS and we add it to the system for you. So, for example, everything in section 2, so your hazards, section 14, your transport classification, and section 3 then your ingredients. The most useful part is section 2. So that's what feeds into your reports. So going back to where do I have hazards, where do I have carcinogens, where do I have toxics, etc. We hand you that information on a plate because we take that off the SDS, which we have sourced in the first place, and we take it off it for you. So that's what the system looks like when you go in to view your safe dashes, etc. With the chemical risk assessments, so what we do with the chemical risk assessment is we don't give you a template and say, there you go, start writing risk assessments. We would sit down with you and we'd see what would work for you. We would set up drop-downs, check boxes, and we would set up a template that works for your business. We would set up something that will be quick and easy to fill in, and it would be relevant for your staff. There are certain fields in, so where were you taking off the information? It'd be pre-populated for you. So the hazards, the occupation exposure limits, hazard statements, symbols, etc., that'll all be pre-populated for you. And finally then, for your chemical risk assessment, we will manage all that document control. So in terms of when you go to write an assessment, you publish it, it gives it a revision date, revision number, etc. All versions are automatically archived, so you never have to consider, okay, I'm going to take this one out and put this one live. That's all managed for you in the background. And that's just a picture, a screenshot of someone that's going in to write a risk assessment. So they have the type of controls that you use to actually write the assessment, and what comes out the other end then is a PDF file. The other kind of features then, which I touched on, are your reports. So you can go in and you say, run reports to see where do you have various hazards, etc. The main point of them is they are based on information we collect off the SDS for you. So that information is there for you the first day you go into the system. Regardless of your risk assessments, etc. And where they are useful is, going back to your risk assessments and how you do them. A common mistake again that I see is people who start off writing risk assessments and they say they start with A for acetone and work their way down. What you really want to do is, you want to run these reports and you start with your carcinogens, your toxics. See can we eliminate them, get those risk assessments done, and work your way down then through your flammables, etc., down to less hazard ones. So rather than start in alphabetical order, you're doing them in terms of hazards. Also then you can use the system for printing labels. So if you have, what you guys touched on there in terms of hinders assessment, where if you have something, maybe you're buying in an IBC and you're decanting it down to maybe 5-gallon drums for use on site, you can pop on Kenda and print a label for the secondary container. The label, like the Excel report, that's there for you day one. We have collected the information you need for the label, so all you need to do to be able to print the label is tell us you have the product. We get the SDS, we collect the information for the label, and you be able to go and print the labels. That's just a view of the Excel reports screen. Finally, just for distribution, I said I was surprised myself how common of an issue it is. You can access everything online, and usually the way we would roll it out on site is, so like if you're rolling out on site this hotel here, we would create a generic username that has read-only access for everyone, and we would actually set up a link for the staff, maybe on their desktops, or if they have an intranet safety page or something like that, we would set up for them, that when they click on that link, it brings them into the site already logged in. So basically to access safe data or access risk assessment, you don't need to learn a username and password. You just go straight in and you access it. You're doing individual logins, which is obviously just your email address and password, and that's for people who are going to be adding products, removing products, writing assessments, etc. There's also the mobile apps, both Android and Apple iOS. And again, where they're useful really is if you've guys or girls out on the road, field engineers, etc., they have access to the safe dashes, they have access to the risk assessments. One small point about the mobile apps on both platforms is they can work online or offline. So you can set up, so I can set up in this hotel here, I set it up and I set up maybe the golf course, because that's where I set that department up as the one that I need offline. So if I'm in the furthest away part of the golf course, maybe where there's no reception, I will always have the risk assessments and I will always have the safe dashes there with me. And that's it really, just this screen just gives a quick maybe view of the different kind of clients that we have. The main thing I'm trying to get across on this screen really is, I suppose, the variety in terms of industries. So you can see we have everyone there from the likes of the HSE, we have city councils, we have food manufacturers, we have the NHS in the UK now, we're with a couple of trusts in them, we have Chelsea Football Club. So we've all different types of manufacturing, all different types of industries, because really what they're all doing is, it's all the same thing. They're using chemicals, they need to do a risk assessment, and they need to do it efficiently. What you see very little here is pure chemical companies, because as I said, they're the ones that can afford time-wise to say they have 2 or 3 people full-time in to do this. That's kind of it really. Does anyone have any questions or queries? Yeah?
Is SafeDoc different to Kendoc?
No, so SafeDoc would have been the predecessor of Kendoc, so we wrote SafeDoc first, and right now SafeDoc is really just, it's the exact same system with a different brand name, but it is actually, it's the same system. Do you use SafeDoc in a hospital, is it? Or?
Hospital, yeah.
Yeah, no, it is the same system. Any other questions or queries on that, or anything I've gone through, or that Henry's gone through earlier on? No, fair enough. Okay.
It's been our first seminar today, so we just have a quick survey, if you wouldn't mind filling out. It's just take you 2 minutes, if that's okay. Thank you so much. Just so we can